Dark Psychology, The Game of Manipulation and Persuasion. Written and published by the Zillion Pro. Chapter 1, The Human Mind, The Perfect Battlefield. The human mind is extraordinary. It can create civilizations, compose music, solve mathematical problems, imagine futures that do not yet exist, and turn ideas into reality. But the same mind that gives human beings extraordinary intelligence also contains predictable weaknesses. We use shortcuts, we respond to emotion, we seek patterns, we protect our beliefs, we want to belong, we fear rejection, we dislike uncertainty, we are influenced by people we perceive as authoritative. And sometimes, without realizing it, we make decisions for reasons very different from the reasons we tell ourselves. This does not make humanity foolish. It makes humanity human. The study of dark psychology begins with this uncomfortable observation. The mind does not always operate like a perfectly rational machine. Understanding that fact is essential to understanding manipulation. The battlefield is not the brain, it is the decision. When people hear the word manipulation, they often imagine someone controlling another person's thoughts. Reality is less dramatic. Most psychological influence operates through decisions. What should I buy? Who should I trust? Should I accept this offer? Should I reveal this information? Should I forgive this person? Should I take this opportunity? Should I believe this story? Should I act now or wait? The individual still makes the decision, but the environment surrounding that decision can dramatically influence the outcome. That is where psychological influence becomes powerful. A person does not necessarily need to control your mind. They may only need to influence what you notice, what you fear, what you desire, or what you believe is possible. Change the frame, and sometimes you change the decision. The first weakness, mental shortcuts. Human beings cannot consciously analyze every piece of information they encounter. Imagine having to carefully evaluate every face you see, every sentence you hear, every advertisement, every traffic signal, every purchase, and every social interaction. Life would become impossible. So the brain uses shortcuts. Psychologists call many of these shortcuts heuristics. They allow us to make rapid judgments without processing every available detail. Most of the time, this is useful, but shortcuts can also produce predictable errors. If something is familiar, we may perceive it as more trustworthy. If many people appear to believe something, we may assume it is true. If an authority figure makes a claim, we may give that claim more weight. If an opportunity appears scarce, we may perceive it as more valuable. If information confirms what we already believe, we may accept it with less scrutiny. These tendencies are not automatic proof that someone has manipulated us, but they create openings through which influence can operate. The need to be right. One of the most powerful psychological forces is the desire to maintain consistency with our existing beliefs. Once people publicly commit themselves to an idea, changing their position can become psychologically uncomfortable. Why? Because changing one's mind can feel like admitting weakness. The result is sometimes a strange phenomenon. The more evidence a person encounters against a cherished belief, the more aggressively they defend it. This is partly connected to confirmation bias, the tendency to notice, interpret, and remember information in ways that support existing beliefs. A skilled communicator understands that people do not always evaluate information neutrally. They often ask, consciously or unconsciously, does this fit what I already believe? This is why intellectual humility is such a powerful defense. The psychologically resilient person can say, I may be wrong. Those 3 words can prevent an enormous number of bad decisions. The need to belong. Humans are social creatures. We want connection. We want acceptance. We want to know that we are part of something. This need has enormous psychological power. People may change opinions because their friends hold different opinions. They may remain silent because everyone else is silent. They may support an idea because respected members of their group support it. They may reject valuable information because accepting it would threaten their social identity. This phenomenon appears everywhere: families, schools, workplaces, communities, religious organizations, political movements, online communities, and social networks. The psychological danger emerges when belonging becomes more important than independent judgment. A person who believes, if I disagree, they will reject me, becomes easier to pressure. The solution is not isolation. It is developing enough psychological independence to tolerate disagreement. authority, and the illusion of certainty. Confidence is persuasive, so is status. When someone speaks with certainty, dresses professionally, occupies a prestigious position, or demonstrates expertise in one area, people may unconsciously extend that credibility into areas where the person has little or no expertise. This is one reason authority can be psychologically powerful. But authority is not the same thing as truth. A person's position does not automatically make every statement correct. A confident tone is not evidence. A title is not evidence. Popularity is not evidence. Certainty is not evidence. The ability to separate who is speaking from whether the claim is actually supported is a crucial psychological skill. Emotion versus reason. The human mind does not operate through logic alone. Emotion affects attention, memory, judgment, and decision-making. Fear narrows attention toward threats. Excitement can increase willingness to take risks. Anger can make opposing information harder to consider. Embarrassment can make people desperate to repair their social image. Desire can make attractive possibilities appear more realistic than they actually are. This is why emotionally intense moments are often poor times for major decisions. When emotions are elevated, the objective is not to become emotionless. That is impossible. The objective is to create enough distance to ask, am I deciding because this is wise, or because I am emotionally activated? That question can interrupt an otherwise automatic reaction. The psychology of scarcity. People tend to value things differently when they believe those things are becoming unavailable. Only a few remaining. Offer expires today. This opportunity may never return. Everyone else is already taking advantage of it. Scarcity can create urgency. Sometimes that urgency is legitimate. A genuinely limited opportunity exists in many areas of life. But artificial urgency can also be used to reduce the amount of time available for reflection. That is the important distinction. When someone insists that you must make an important decision immediately, pause. Ask, why must I decide now? If the opportunity is legitimate, reasonable consideration should not automatically destroy it. If the pressure disappears when you slow down, the pressure itself may have been part of the strategy. The desire for reciprocity. Humans generally dislike feeling indebted. When someone gives us something, we often feel a psychological obligation to give something back. A gift, a favor, an introduction, a compliment, a concession. This tendency can support healthy relationships, but it can also create uncomfortable pressure. The critical question is, was the gesture genuinely generous, or was it designed to create an obligation? Not every act of kindness contains a hidden agenda. Suspicion of everyone is not psychological intelligence. The mature approach is to recognize the possibility without automatically assuming it. The vulnerability of ego. Few forces are more psychologically interesting than ego. People want to see themselves as intelligent, competent, attractive, moral, successful, independent, or courageous. When someone threatens that self-image, emotional defenses can activate. This is why a person may reject useful criticism simply because of who delivered it. It is also why praise can sometimes influence behavior. If someone tells you that you are exceptionally intelligent, generous, brave, or sophisticated, the compliment may create a desire to behave consistently with that identity. The lesson is not to distrust compliments. It is to remain aware of how identity influences decisions. Ask yourself, would I make the same decision if nobody were watching? That question cuts directly through ego. The need for certainty. Uncertainty is psychologically uncomfortable. When people do not know what is happening, they often search for explanations. Sometimes they accept explanations too quickly. A confident person who offers a simple answer can become extremely persuasive in an uncertain environment. This is one reason simplistic narratives can outperform complicated truths. The problem is that reality is frequently complicated. There may be multiple causes. There may be incomplete information. There may be genuine ambiguity. A person who is comfortable saying, "I don't know yet," is less vulnerable to someone selling artificial certainty. The dark triad. Psychological discussions of manipulation frequently mention the dark triad: narcissism, characterized by traits involving grandiosity, entitlement, and a strong need for admiration; Machiavellianism, associated with strategic interpersonal behavior; cynicism, and willingness to use others for personal objectives; psychopathy, associated with traits such as reduced empathy, shallow affect, impulsivity, and antisocial behavior. These concepts can help researchers discuss patterns of personality and behavior, but they should not become casual labels. Calling someone a psychopath because they behave selfishly is not psychological analysis. Neither is diagnosing a difficult colleague as a narcissist because they are arrogant. Good psychological reasoning requires evidence, context, and restraint. The most dangerous vulnerability. There is one vulnerability that deserves special attention: overconfidence in your own immunity. People who believe they cannot be manipulated may become less cautious. They assume, I am too intelligent. I can always see through people. Nobody can pressure me. I know psychology. This confidence can become a blind spot. Psychological resilience does not come from believing that manipulation cannot affect you. It comes from understanding that everyone has biases and pressure points. The objective is therefore not paranoia. It is disciplined awareness. Build a psychological firewall. A psychological firewall is not an emotionless personality. It is a set of habits that create space between influence and decision. Before making an important decision, ask: 1. What exactly am I being asked to do? 2. What information am I missing? What emotion is strongest right now? 4. Who benefits if I say yes? 5. Who bears the consequences if I am wrong? 6. Am I being given enough time to think? 7. Would I make the same decision without social pressure? 8. What evidence would change my mind? 9. Am I protecting a fact or protecting my ego? 10. What would an independent observer see? These questions do not make you impossible to influence. They make you more difficult to influence without your awareness. And that distinction matters. The mind you must master first. The study of dark psychology ultimately turns inward. Before trying to understand how other people influence you, you must understand the forces operating inside yourself. Your fears, your desires, your assumptions, your insecurities, your identity, your need for approval, your need to be right, your appetite for certainty, your emotional triggers. These are not defects to be ashamed of. They are components of being human. But anything you refuse to examine can eventually influence you from the shadows. The person who understands this does not become cold, paranoid, or manipulative. They become harder to deceive. They learn to pause. They learn to question. They learn to observe. They learn to separate emotion from evidence. And most importantly, they learn that the first battlefield in psychological influence is not another person's mind. It is their own. Chapter 2: The Psychology of Influence. Influence is everywhere. A parent influences a child. A teacher influences a student. A leader influences a team. A business influences its customers. Friends influence one another. Algorithms influence what people notice. Institutions influence what societies consider normal. Influence itself is neither good nor evil. It is a fundamental feature of human interaction. The darker dimension begins when influence becomes concealed, exploitative, coercive, or deliberately designed to bypass another person's informed judgment. To understand manipulation, therefore, we must first understand ordinary influence. Because manipulation is rarely a completely different phenomenon. It is often influence pushed beyond the boundaries of transparency and autonomy. Influence begins with attention. Before someone can influence a decision, they usually need to influence attention. What are you looking at? What are you thinking about? What information seems important? What possibility are you considering? Attention is a limited resource. If someone successfully directs your attention toward one part of a situation, while keeping another part outside your awareness, your eventual judgment may change without anyone explicitly telling you what to believe. Consider a simple example. A seller emphasizes everything you could gain from an opportunity, while saying little about the costs. Nothing they said may necessarily be false, yet the presentation creates an incomplete psychological picture. This is why influence is not only about what is said, it is also about what is emphasized, what is ignored, and what the listener is encouraged to notice. The architecture of persuasion. Persuasion generally works through a combination of several psychological forces. A person must first capture attention. Then the message must appear credible. It must connect with something the listener values. Finally, the listener must believe that acting is reasonable. This produces a basic sequence: attention, interpretation, emotion, evaluation, decision. Manipulative communication may attempt to interfere with one or more of these stages. It might capture attention through fear. It might influence interpretation through selective information. It might intensify emotion through urgency. It might distort evaluation through misleading comparisons. Understanding this sequence gives you an important advantage. Instead of merely asking whether you agree with a message, you can examine how the message is attempting to move you toward agreement. The power of reciprocity. Humans generally respond to generosity with a desire to reciprocate. Someone helps you. You feel inclined to help them. Someone gives you a gift. You may feel obligated to return the gesture. Someone makes a concession during a negotiation. You may feel pressure to make one yourself. Reciprocity is essential to functioning relationships. Without it, cooperation would be difficult, but the same psychological tendency can be exploited. A person might create an obligation and later use that obligation to demand something unreasonable. The defense is simple, but psychologically difficult. A favor does not automatically create unlimited debt. Gratitude is not surrender. Appreciation is not obligation. A gift does not purchase control over your future decisions. Healthy reciprocity involves freedom. Manipulative reciprocity creates pressure. Social proof: everyone is doing it. When uncertain, people often look toward others for guidance. If everyone appears to believe something, that belief can seem more credible. If thousands of people purchase something, the product can appear safer. If an idea becomes popular, people may assume that popularity itself proves quality. This is social proof. It is useful because other people's behavior sometimes contains valuable information, but popularity and truth are not identical. Millions of people can believe something false. A popular product can be poor. A large crowd can make a terrible decision. A viral claim can spread faster than accurate information. The psychological trap is confusing what many people believe with what the evidence demonstrates. Whenever popularity becomes part of an argument, ask, does the number of people who believe this actually provide evidence that it is true? Sometimes it does. Sometimes it merely provides social pressure. Authority, when confidence looks like competence. People naturally give weight to authority. Doctors, engineers, professors, executives, religious leaders, public officials, celebrities, and other recognized figures can influence perceptions simply because of their perceived status. Authority can be valuable. Experts exist for a reason. The danger arises when authority is transferred beyond its legitimate boundaries. A famous athlete can be an expert on athletics without being an expert on economics. A successful entrepreneur can understand business without understanding medicine. A respected public figure can still make unsupported claims. The psychological defense is not disrespect. It is specificity. Ask, what exactly is this person qualified to know? That question separates genuine expertise from borrowed credibility. Liking, the influence of affinity. People are generally more receptive to those they like. Similarity increases connection. Shared interests create trust. Compliments create warmth. Familiarity can reduce suspicion. Physical attractiveness, charisma, humor, and confidence can also affect impressions. None of these qualities tells you whether someone's argument is correct, but they can influence how willing you are to accept the argument. This creates a subtle psychological danger. We may evaluate the message through our feelings about the messenger. Someone we like can receive excessive benefit of the doubt. Someone we dislike can be judged too harshly. A useful mental discipline is to separate "I like this person" from "I have evidence that this person's claim is correct." Those are different conclusions. Scarcity and urgency. Scarcity changes perception. When something appears difficult to obtain, people may assign greater value to it. That is why phrases such as limited availability, exclusive access, or ending soon can create psychological urgency. Sometimes scarcity is genuine. Sometimes it is manufactured. The crucial distinction is whether the urgency reflects reality or is being used to reduce your opportunity to think. A decision made under unnecessary pressure is more likely to be reactive. When confronted with an urgent request, ask, "What happens if I wait?" If the answer is catastrophic, determine whether that consequence is objectively real. If the answer is simply that the opportunity will become less convenient, you may have more time than the communicator wants you to believe. Commitment and consistency. People generally prefer to appear consistent. If you publicly support an idea, you may later feel pressure to defend it. If you promise something, you may find it uncomfortable to reverse your position. If you identify strongly with a group, criticism of that group may feel like criticism of yourself. This psychological tendency can produce commitment traps. A person makes a small commitment, then another, then another. Eventually, they find themselves defending a position they might never have accepted if it had been presented in its final form from the beginning. The defense is recognizing an important principle. A previous decision does not permanently bind you to future decisions. Changing your mind after receiving new information is not necessarily inconsistency. Sometimes it is intellectual maturity. Framing, the same reality, different psychological response. How something is presented can influence how people perceive it. Imagine two statements. This procedure has a 90% success rate, and this procedure has a 10% failure rate. The underlying mathematics may be identical. The psychological response may not be. This is known as framing. Frames influence which aspect of reality receives attention. Politicians use frames, businesses use frames, news organizations use frames, individuals use frames, even your own mind uses frames. The goal is not to eliminate framing. It is impossible. The goal is to recognize it. When someone presents a strong conclusion, ask, what would this look like if it were framed differently? That single question can expose assumptions hidden inside language. Emotional contagion. Emotions can spread through groups. One angry person can influence an entire room. One anxious person can increase collective anxiety. One enthusiastic leader can energize a team. This phenomenon is sometimes called emotional contagion. It becomes especially important in high-pressure environments. Panic can begin to feel like evidence, but emotion is not evidence. A crowd can be afraid and still be wrong. A crowd can be excited and still be making a poor decision. The ability to remain mentally independent during collective emotional escalation is one of the most valuable forms of psychological strength. The power of questions. Influence does not always operate through statements. Questions can influence thinking by directing attention. What will happen if you lose this opportunity? Do you really want to disappoint them? Why would you reject such a good offer? Don't you trust me? These questions may appear conversational, but they can contain assumptions. A powerful response is to examine the assumption itself. Instead of answering immediately, ask, why do you assume those are the only options? This technique is valuable because it breaks the frame. You are no longer playing entirely within the psychological structure someone else created. The darker side. Manufactured choice, one of the most sophisticated forms of influence, is presenting a limited set of choices while hiding other possibilities. Imagine being told, you can either accept this proposal or lose the entire opportunity. That sounds like a choice between two options. But perhaps there is a third, wait and gather more information. Or a fourth, negotiate different terms. Or a fifth, decline and pursue another opportunity. Manipulation can sometimes operate by narrowing the perceived choice set. The defense is therefore to ask, what alternatives have not been presented? That question restores psychological freedom. Influence without awareness. The most powerful influence is not always the influence you consciously notice. A person's environment affects behavior. The people around them affect expectations. Repeated messages affect familiarity. Social norms affect acceptable behavior. Technology affects attention. Design affects choices. Culture affects beliefs. This means that psychological influence is not limited to one person trying to manipulate another. Entire environments can shape behavior. The wise individual therefore studies not only conversations but also systems. Ask, who designed this environment? What behavior does it reward? What behavior does it discourage? What information receives attention? What information disappears? Who benefits from the current arrangement? These questions move psychological analysis from the individual level to the structural level, becoming difficult to influence unconsciously. The objective is not to become impossible to persuade. That would be undesirable. A person who refuses every argument, every suggestion, and every change of opinion is not psychologically strong. They are psychologically rigid. The stronger position is selective openness. Listen, question, evaluate, update, Decide, repeat. A psychologically resilient person can change their mind without feeling defeated. They can accept criticism without collapsing. They can reject pressure without becoming hostile. They can appreciate persuasion without surrendering judgment. They can say, "That is a compelling argument. Let me think about it." Those words create something manipulation dislikes. Time. Time creates distance. Distance creates reflection. Reflection creates choice. And choice is the foundation of psychological autonomy. The real power of influence is not inherently about domination. At its highest level, influence is the ability to communicate ideas effectively while respecting another person's capacity to choose. The darker side appears when that capacity is deliberately undermined. You do not study it merely to become better at persuading others. You study it so that you can recognize when someone is attempting to persuade you. Once you understand attention, reciprocity, social proof, authority, liking, scarcity, commitment, framing, and emotional influence, ordinary interactions begin to look different. You notice the structure beneath the conversation. You hear the assumption inside the question. You recognize the urgency behind the offer. You detect when popularity is being substituted for evidence. You notice when emotion is being used to prevent reflection. And you become capable of asking the most important question in the entire psychology of influence. Am I making this decision because I genuinely choose it, or because someone has carefully engineered the conditions under which I am choosing? And awareness is the first defense against manipulation. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Manipulation. Manipulation rarely looks like manipulation while it is happening. That is what makes it powerful. A blatant threat is easy to recognize. An obvious lie can be challenged. An aggressive demand can trigger resistance. But sophisticated manipulation often arrives quietly. It may sound like concern. It may look like friendship. It may appear to be advice. It may present itself as an opportunity. The manipulator's objective is not necessarily to force a person to act. Often, the objective is to shape the psychological environment around a decision until the desired choice feels natural, reasonable, or inevitable. This is the architecture of manipulation. It is not one technique, it is a structure. The first principle: control the frame. Every interaction has a frame. A frame determines what people believe the conversation is about, which facts seem important, what options appear available, and what conclusions seem reasonable. Consider two different frames. How can we make this project succeed versus how much will failure cost us? The facts may be identical. The psychological experience is different. The first frame directs attention toward opportunity. The second directs attention toward risk. Neither is automatically dishonest. The danger begins when a communicator deliberately creates a frame that excludes important realities. If someone wants you to purchase something, they may frame the discussion around benefits while minimizing costs. If someone wants your loyalty, they may frame disagreement as betrayal. If someone wants control, they may frame independence as selfishness. The first question to ask when facing strong persuasion is therefore, what frame am I being asked to accept? Once you recognize the frame, you can examine what exists outside it. Step 1. Identify the target. Manipulation begins with understanding the person being influenced. People have different psychological priorities. One person values money, another values recognition, another fears rejection, another wants security, another wants freedom, another wants to feel intelligent, another desperately wants to belong. These differences matter because influence becomes more powerful when it connects with something personally significant. This does not mean every person who understands another person's needs is manipulative. Good leaders, therapists, teachers, parents, and negotiators also study human needs. The distinction lies in the purpose and method. Understanding someone so you can communicate effectively is different from understanding them so you can secretly exploit their vulnerabilities. For self-defense, however, recognizing this process is essential. Ask, what does this person seem to know about what matters to me? How are they using that knowledge? Step 2. Capture attention. Nobody can influence what nobody notices. Attention is therefore the gateway. A manipulative message may use fear, novelty, controversy, outrage, flattery, urgency, or curiosity to capture attention. Once attention is captured, the communicator has greater control over what information receives psychological weight. This is particularly important in modern digital environments. Notifications compete for attention. Advertisements compete for attention. Social media platforms compete for attention. News headlines compete for attention. Political campaigns compete for attention. Influencers compete for attention. The individual who understands attention understands something fundamental. What you repeatedly look at eventually affects what you think about. Protecting attention is therefore a form of psychological self-defense. Step 3. Create an emotional state. Emotion changes perception. A frightened person evaluates information differently from a relaxed person. An angry person may interpret neutral behavior as hostile. An excited person may underestimate risk. A person experiencing shame may become desperate to restore their reputation. A manipulative interaction may therefore attempt to create an emotional state before presenting the desired decision. This is one reason emotional regulation matters. If someone makes you intensely angry and immediately demands a decision, slow down. If someone creates intense fear and immediately presents themselves as the solution, slow down. If someone overwhelms you with praise and immediately asks for a major favor, slow down. The objective is not to suppress emotion. It is to avoid allowing someone else's emotional framing to become your decision-making system. Step 4. Narrow the options. Manipulation can become powerful when the perceived number of choices decreases. Either you trust me or you don't. Either you're committed or you're against us. You can accept this offer now or forget it. These statements create artificial binaries. Reality is usually more complicated. You can trust someone partially. You can disagree with a person while remaining loyal to a shared objective. You can negotiate. You can wait. You can investigate. You can seek a second opinion. You can walk away. A useful psychological habit is to ask what other options exist. The question itself can disrupt an artificial choice architecture. Step 5. Introduce pressure. Pressure accelerates decisions. Sometimes pressure is legitimate. A genuine deadline exists. A real emergency requires immediate action. But pressure can also be manufactured. A communicator may create urgency because reflection could weaken their influence. The principle is simple. The less time you have to think, the more important it becomes to think carefully. Do not automatically reject urgent decisions. Instead, distinguish between objective urgency and psychological urgency. Objective urgency comes from reality. Psychological urgency comes from someone's attempt to make reality feel more urgent than it actually is. Step 6. Create a narrative. Human beings understand complex situations through stories. A narrative gives events meaning. It identifies a problem. It identifies a cause. It identifies a victim. It identifies an enemy. It identifies a solution. This can be extremely useful, but narratives can also simplify reality beyond recognition. A manipulative narrative might sound like, "Everyone is against us. Only I can help you. They don't understand what you're going through. If you leave, everything will collapse." Such narratives can create psychological dependence because they simplify the world into a small number of emotionally charged categories. The defense is complexity. Ask, what information would this story leave out? Step 7. Establish a pattern. Manipulation is not always a single event. Sometimes it develops gradually. A person may repeatedly make small requests, then slightly larger requests, then requests that would once have seemed unreasonable. Because each step appears only marginally different from the previous one, the overall movement can be difficult to notice. This is why boundaries are important. A boundary is not simply a refusal. It is a psychological signal that communicates, there is a limit to what I will accept. Without boundaries, small violations can gradually become normalized. Step 8. Manufacture obligation. Obligation can be psychological glue. A person may remind you repeatedly of what they have done for you. After everything I've done for you, you owe me. I was there when nobody else was. These statements may refer to genuine sacrifices, but past generosity does not automatically create unlimited authority over another person's future decisions. Healthy relationships involve reciprocity. Unhealthy relationships may turn reciprocity into debt. The distinction is whether gratitude remains voluntary. Step 9. Distort information. Manipulation does not always require an outright lie. Information can be distorted through omission, selective presentation, misleading comparisons, exaggerated certainty, vague language, incomplete context, emotionally loaded descriptions. A technically true statement can still create a misleading impression if crucial context is deliberately excluded. This is why critical thinking must go beyond asking, is this statement technically true? Also ask, what important information would I need to understand this situation accurately? That question exposes incomplete narratives. Step 10. Isolate the decision. Manipulation becomes easier when a person cannot consult independent perspectives. That is why psychological isolation can be dangerous. A manipulator may discourage outside opinions. Don't tell anyone. They won't understand. You shouldn't listen to them. It's between us. Sometimes privacy is legitimate, but when secrecy consistently prevents someone from receiving independent information, caution is justified. Healthy relationships generally survive scrutiny. A claim that collapses when examined by independent observers deserves examination. The feedback loop. Manipulation can become self-reinforcing. A person influences someone, the person complies, the manipulator learns that the method worked. The method is repeated. The target becomes accustomed to complying. The manipulator increases expectations. Eventually, behavior that once seemed unacceptable becomes normal. This is why early recognition matters. The longer a destructive pattern continues, the more psychologically difficult it can become to challenge. Breaking the pattern may require a simple but uncomfortable act. Interrupting the expected response. Pause, question, delay, refuse, seek outside information, change the conversation. The objective is to break automaticity. Manipulation through identity. One of the deepest forms of psychological pressure involves identity. People want to behave consistently with how they see themselves. Someone who believes they are loyal may feel unable to say no. Someone who sees themselves as generous may overextend themselves. Someone who believes they are strong may refuse to admit vulnerability. Someone who identifies as intelligent may become defensive when corrected. A manipulator may exploit these identities by creating a contradiction. If you were really loyal, you would do this. If you were genuinely generous, you wouldn't refuse. If you're confident, why are you afraid? The statement appears to challenge the person's identity, rather than simply requesting an action. The defense is powerful. Your identity does not obligate you to accept every demand associated with it. You can be loyal and still establish boundaries. You can be generous and still say no. You can be confident and still ask questions. You can be intelligent and still change your mind. The illusion of inevitability. A sophisticated manipulative environment can make one outcome appear inevitable. The conversation gradually removes alternatives. The narrative becomes more extreme. The decision deadline approaches. Eventually, the target thinks, I have no choice. But often, the psychological construction has hidden the choices. There may still be alternatives. The most important step is recognizing that feeling trapped is not always evidence that you are actually trapped. When possible, step outside the immediate emotional environment. Ask someone independent. Write down the options. Separate facts from assumptions. Calculate the consequences. Then reconsider. Distance can reveal possibilities that pressure concealed. The architecture of resistance. Understanding manipulation is useful only if it changes behavior. Build a personal resistance system. Pause. Do not automatically respond to emotional pressure. Question. Ask what is being assumed. Verify. Check important claims independently. Expand. Look for alternatives that were not presented. Separate. Distinguish facts from interpretations. Consult. Seek an independent perspective when the stakes are high. Decide. Make the decision when your thinking is clear, not simply when someone else wants an answer. These steps are simple. Their power comes from repetition. The manipulator's greatest advantage. The greatest advantage of manipulation is not intelligence. It is unnoticed influence. If you recognize the pressure, you can evaluate it. If you can evaluate it, you can resist it. If you can resist it, the psychological structure begins to collapse. This is why awareness is more valuable than paranoia. Paranoia sees manipulation everywhere. Awareness examines evidence. Paranoia assumes motives. Awareness investigates behavior. Paranoia destroys trust. Awareness establishes boundaries. The goal of studying dark psychology is therefore not to turn you into someone who suspects everyone. It is to make you someone who observes before surrendering judgment. The final lesson: manipulation is architecture. It has foundations. It has pressure points. It has psychological triggers. It has patterns. And because it has structure, it can be examined. When someone attempts to influence you, look beneath the surface. What are they trying to make you notice? What emotion are they creating? What assumptions are they introducing? What choices are they presenting? What alternatives are disappearing? What information is missing? Why must you decide now? Who benefits from your decision? And perhaps the most revealing question of all, would I still make this decision if the psychological pressure disappeared? If the answer is yes, you may simply be experiencing ordinary persuasion. If the answer is no, stop, step back, reclaim your attention, recover your ability to evaluate, because the most important psychological victory is not controlling another person's mind. It is refusing to surrender control of your own. Chapter 4. Emotional Leverage Logic explains what people believe they should do. Emotion often determines what they actually do. A person may understand that an opportunity is risky and still pursue it because of excitement. They may know that an argument is weak and still defend it because their pride has been wounded. They may recognize that a relationship is unhealthy and still remain because they fear being alone. This is the paradox at the center of emotional leverage. People do not make decisions with logic alone. Every decision carries an emotional component. Fear, hope, anger, guilt, pride, love, shame, envy, excitement. The person who understands this does not necessarily possess control over another human being, but they understand something important. Changing someone's emotional state can change how that person interprets reality. That is why emotional awareness is one of the strongest forms of psychological self-defense. Emotion is not the enemy. The first mistake would be to treat emotion as weakness. Emotion is essential. Fear warns us about danger. Anger can signal that a boundary has been crossed. Sadness can reveal loss. Joy reinforces meaningful experiences. Guilt can encourage accountability. Love creates attachment and cooperation. The problem is not emotion itself. The problem is unexamined emotion. When emotion becomes intense enough, it can narrow attention and reduce our willingness to consider alternatives. A frightened person may focus exclusively on escape. An angry person may focus exclusively on retaliation. A desperate person may focus exclusively on immediate relief. A person overwhelmed by excitement may focus exclusively on potential rewards. Emotional intelligence, therefore, does not mean becoming emotionless. It means learning to recognize emotion without automatically obeying it. Fear, the ancient lever. Fear is among the strongest influences on human behavior. It creates urgency. It narrows attention. It encourages protective action. This makes fear useful and vulnerable to exploitation. A person can be influenced through fear of losing money, rejection, failure, embarrassment, uncertainty, social exclusion, disappointing others, missing an opportunity. Fear-based manipulation often follows a simple psychological structure: threat, anxiety, apparent solution. Someone creates or exaggerates a threat and then positions themselves, their product, their opinion, or their demand as the solution. The important question is the threat real, exaggerated, or manufactured? If the threat is real, appropriate action may be necessary. If the threat is exaggerated, emotional pressure may be distorting judgment. If the threat is manufactured, the entire decision may be built upon deception. The psychology of urgency. Fear and urgency often work together. There isn't time to think. If you wait, you'll lose everything. Sometimes immediate action is genuinely necessary, but unnecessary urgency is psychologically revealing. When someone insists on speed, ask, who benefits from reducing my time to think? This does not mean every deadline is suspicious. It means the presence of pressure should increase awareness. A useful rule is, the greater the consequence of the decision, the more valuable independent thinking becomes. Guilt, the invisible weight. Guilt can be one of the most subtle forms of emotional pressure. A person may not threaten you directly. Instead, they make refusal emotionally painful. After everything I've done for you, I thought you cared. I wouldn't do that to you. You're really going to abandon me? Sometimes such statements express genuine hurt. But when guilt is deliberately used to make someone surrender a reasonable boundary, it becomes manipulative. The distinction lies in whether the other person's emotions are being communicated honestly or weaponized to control behavior. Healthy communication allows someone to say, I'm disappointed. Manipulative communication may imply, because you disappointed me, you are morally obligated to do what I want. Those are not the same. Shame, attacking the identity. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, something is wrong with me. That distinction matters. Guilt can sometimes encourage correction. Shame can attack identity. A person experiencing shame may become desperate to restore their sense of worth. This creates psychological vulnerability. If someone repeatedly attacks your intelligence, competence, character, appearance, or worth in order to make you dependent upon their approval, the interaction deserves serious scrutiny. Healthy criticism addresses behavior. Manipulative degradation attacks identity. Anger as a tool of pressure. Anger can create intimidation. A person does not need to make an explicit threat to create psychological pressure. An unpredictable temper, aggressive tone, or hostile reaction can teach others that disagreement will be punished emotionally. Eventually, people may begin modifying their behavior simply to avoid the person's anger. This is an important pattern to recognize. When people stop expressing honest opinions because they are afraid of someone's reaction, psychological freedom has already been reduced. The solution is not always confrontation. Sometimes the wisest response is distance, support from trusted people, or establishing clear boundaries. Flattery and the hunger for recognition. Not all emotional leverage is negative. Flattery can be powerful precisely because it feels good. People want to feel valued. A carefully chosen compliment can increase openness and trust. Again, compliments are not inherently manipulative. The warning sign is the pattern. If praise consistently appears immediately before requests, pressure, or attempts to obtain something, examine the connection. Ask, would I respond differently if the compliment had never been given? That question separates appreciation from psychological influence. The need to be needed. Some people derive a significant portion of their identity from being useful to others. They solve problems, they provide money, they offer advice, they rescue people. They become the person everyone depends upon. This can be admirable, but it can also become a vulnerability. Someone who fears becoming unnecessary may tolerate unhealthy behavior because they believe, they need me. A manipulator may reinforce this belief. Healthy relationships allow mutual dependence without destroying independence. Being needed should not require surrendering autonomy. Love and attachment. Attachment can influence judgment more powerfully than almost any abstract argument. When people care deeply about someone, they may reinterpret warning signs to protect the relationship. They may excuse behavior they would immediately reject from a stranger. They may defend someone despite contradictory evidence. They may accept unreasonable demands because losing the relationship feels unbearable. This does not mean love is irrational. It means attachment changes the psychological stakes. The defense is not emotional detachment. It is maintaining a connection to reality while emotionally invested. Ask, if someone I did not love behaved this way, how would I evaluate it? The answer can reveal how attachment is affecting judgment. Emotional blackmail. Emotional blackmail occurs when someone uses fear, obligation, or guilt to pressure another person into complying with demands. A common pattern is demand, resistance, emotional threat, compliance. The threat may not be explicit. It can be implied through withdrawal, anger, guilt, humiliation, or dramatic statements. The psychological message becomes, if you do not give me what I want, you will have to endure an emotional consequence. The important distinction is between expressing genuine emotion and using emotion as a weapon. Everyone is allowed to feel disappointed. Nobody is entitled to use another person's guilt as an unlimited source of control. The emotional hook. People often have recurring emotional triggers. One person reacts strongly to criticism. Another reacts to rejection. Another cannot tolerate being ignored. Another becomes anxious when uncertain. Another feels compelled to prove themselves. These triggers are psychologically significant. If someone repeatedly discovers which emotional reactions they can provoke, they may begin using those reactions strategically. This is why self-awareness matters. Ask yourself, what situations reliably make me react before I think? Those situations deserve special attention, not because they make you weak, because automatic reactions create opportunities for poor decisions. The pause, one of the simplest psychological defenses, is also one of the most powerful. Pause before responding. If someone has made you extremely angry, wait. If someone has frightened you, gather information. If someone has overwhelmed you with praise, slow down. If someone has made you feel guilty, examine the actual obligation. If someone has created urgency, verify the deadline. A pause interrupts the emotional sequence. Instead of stimulus, emotion, reaction, you create stimulus, emotion, pause, evaluation, response. That small gap can change everything. Emotional labeling. A useful technique is to name what you are feeling. Instead of thinking something is wrong, say, I am feeling anxious. Instead of, I have to do this, say, I am feeling pressured. Instead of they are obviously disrespecting me, say, I am feeling angry about what happened. Labeling the emotion creates psychological distance. You are no longer completely inside the emotion, you are observing it. That distinction can improve judgment. Facts versus feelings. A powerful psychological discipline is separating what happened from what I feel about what happened. For example, fact, someone has not responded to your message. Interpretation, they must be angry with me. The first is observable, the second is an interpretation. Or fact, an opportunity has a deadline. Interpretation, this is my only chance. Again, different conclusions. Manipulation often becomes more powerful when interpretations are mistaken for facts. Learn to ask, what do I actually know? Then, what am I assuming? That distinction protects judgment. The emotional recovery period. Some decisions should not be made while emotionally overwhelmed. After intense conflict, disappointment, excitement, humiliation, or fear, give yourself time to return to a calmer psychological state. This is not avoidance, it is cognitive recovery. Once emotional intensity decreases, new information becomes easier to evaluate. The decision that seemed obvious at midnight may look very different the next morning. That is not inconsistency, it is perspective. Building emotional independence. Emotional independence does not mean needing nobody. It means your emotional stability is not completely controlled by another person's approval, anger, attention, or rejection. You can appreciate praise without depending upon it. You can tolerate disagreement. You can survive disappointment. You can accept criticism without allowing it to define you. You can care about someone without surrendering your boundaries. You can say no without believing that you are a bad person. This is psychological strength, the ultimate emotional advantage. The person who controls their own emotional responses is difficult to push into impulsive decisions. They may still feel fear. They may still become angry. They may still experience guilt. They may still desire approval. But they recognize these emotions as information, not commands. Fear can say, pay attention. It does not have to say, run. Anger can say, something matters. It does not have to say, attack. Guilt can say, examine your behavior. It does not have to say, surrender your boundary. Desire can say, this matters to me. It does not have to say, take it immediately. That distinction is the heart of emotional mastery. The final lesson. Emotional leverage works because emotions matter. The goal is not to eliminate emotion, it is to prevent emotion from becoming an invisible steering wheel in someone else's hands. Learn your triggers. Recognize pressure. Question urgency. Separate facts from interpretations. Pause before major decisions. Maintain boundaries, and never confuse emotional intensity with truth. Because when someone can determine what you fear, what you crave, what you feel guilty about, and what you desperately need to prove, they may not control your mind, but they can influence the conditions under which your mind makes decisions. The strongest defense is therefore simple. Feel deeply. Think clearly. Decide deliberately. That is how you take the emotional lever out of someone else's hands and put it back where it belongs, under your own conscious control. Chapter 5. The Power of Perception. Reality matters. But human beings rarely experience reality without interpretation. We see an event, interpret it, assign meaning to it, and then respond according to that meaning. Two people can witness exactly the same event and walk away with completely different conclusions. One sees confidence, another sees arrogance. One sees caution, another sees fear. One sees ambition, another sees greed. One sees leadership, another sees control. The event has not changed. The perception has. This is why perception is one of the most important territories in the study of influence. People do not respond only to what happens. They respond to what they believe what happened means. Perception is a psychological filter. The human brain receives enormous amounts of information. It cannot process everything equally, so it filters, it selects, it organizes, it interprets, and it creates a working model of reality. That model is useful. Your perception of a person is influenced by their appearance, voice, reputation, behavior, previous experiences, social status, and your own expectations. This creates an important psychological principle. We often respond to our interpretation of a person before we fully understand the person. That is why first impressions can be so powerful. And that is why first impressions can also be wrong. The first impression. People form impressions quickly. Within a short interaction, we begin making assumptions about someone's competence, confidence, friendliness, trustworthiness, and social position. These judgments can be useful. They can also be inaccurate. A quiet person may be interpreted as insecure. A confident person may be interpreted as competent. A well-dressed person may be perceived as successful. A charismatic speaker may be perceived as knowledgeable. But none of these conclusions is guaranteed. Appearance can create an impression. It cannot establish character. Confidence can create credibility. It cannot establish competence. Popularity can create familiarity. It cannot establish truth. This distinction is essential for anyone studying psychological influence. The halo effect. One positive characteristic can influence our perception of unrelated characteristics. This is commonly known as the halo effect. A person who appears attractive may be judged as more capable. A person who speaks confidently may be perceived as more intelligent. A successful entrepreneur may be assumed to possess wisdom in unrelated fields. A respected leader may receive excessive benefit of the doubt. The psychological problem is that one positive quality becomes evidence without justification for several others. The defense is simple. Evaluate characteristics separately. Ask, is this person likable? Are they competent? Are they trustworthy? Are they knowledgeable about this particular subject? Do their actions match their claims? One answer should not automatically determine the others. Reputation as psychological currency. Reputation influences expectations before interaction even begins. If you hear that someone is brilliant, you may interpret their behavior differently. If you hear that someone is dishonest, the same behavior may appear suspicious. Reputation therefore operates like psychological preloading. It prepares the mind to interpret future information in a particular direction. This can be useful when reputation is based on reliable evidence, but reputations can also be manufactured. A person can repeatedly describe themselves as successful. An organization can emphasize awards. A brand can surround itself with impressive imagery. A public figure can carefully construct a desirable identity. None of this necessarily proves deception, but it demonstrates an important principle. Perception can be deliberately managed. Image versus evidence. A sophisticated image can create an impression of competence before competence has been demonstrated. A professional website does not guarantee a professional service. Expensive clothing does not prove financial success. A large following does not prove expertise. An impressive title does not prove wisdom. A polished presentation does not prove that the underlying claims are accurate. This is why critical thinkers separate presentation from substance. Ask, what evidence exists beneath the image? That question moves perception toward reality. The power of framing. Perception can be influenced through framing. Imagine a person described as a determined leader who refuses to compromise. Now imagine the same person described as a stubborn individual who refuses to listen. Perhaps both descriptions refer to the same behavior. The words determine the frame. This happens constantly. A business calls layoffs restructuring. A politician calls a controversial policy reform. A salesperson calls a price increase premium positioning. An opponent calls the same action exploitation. Language does not merely describe reality. It can influence how reality is interpreted. The defense is to translate emotionally charged language into neutral descriptions. Instead of asking, is this reform good or bad? Ask, what exactly is changing and what are the consequences? Neutral language can expose emotional framing. The story behind the person. People rarely evaluate individuals as isolated collections of facts. We create stories. He's ambitious. She's difficult. They're unreliable. She's extremely intelligent. Once a story becomes established, new information may be interpreted through it. This connects with confirmation bias. If you believe someone is dishonest, ambiguous behavior may appear suspicious. If you believe someone is trustworthy, the same behavior may receive an innocent interpretation. The danger is that the story begins controlling the evidence, rather than the evidence controlling the story. Reputation attacks. Because perception is powerful, damaging someone's reputation can influence how others interpret them. A person's credibility can be weakened through rumors, selective information, insinuation, or repeated negative descriptions. This is especially dangerous because people sometimes remember the accusation even after forgetting whether it was ever proven. The psychological defense is evidence discipline. Ask, what exactly happened? What is independently verified? What is merely being claimed? Who benefits if I believe this story? Do not allow repetition to substitute for evidence. A rumor repeated 1,000 times is still a rumor unless supported by reliable evidence. The psychology of labels. Labels simplify complexity. Genius, loser, traitor, expert, criminal, leader, failure. Once a label is accepted, people often interpret subsequent behavior through it. Labels can therefore become psychological shortcuts. They can help organize information, but they can also prevent careful observation. Instead of asking, what kind of person is this? Ask, what has this person actually done? Behavior provides more useful evidence than dramatic labels. The confidence illusion. Confidence can be persuasive because uncertainty is uncomfortable. A person who speaks decisively may appear more competent than someone who carefully acknowledges uncertainty. But genuine expertise often includes the ability to say, I don't know, the evidence is incomplete, there are several possibilities, I could be wrong. False certainty can sound impressive, intellectual humility can sound less dramatic. Yet humility is often a better indicator of sound reasoning than theatrical confidence. When evaluating someone, look beyond certainty. Look for evidence, consistency, competence, track record, accountability. The influence of appearance. Appearance affects perception. This is a basic feature of human psychology. But appearance is particularly vulnerable to manipulation because it is immediate. A carefully designed environment can communicate wealth. A professional presentation can communicate competence. A uniform can communicate authority. A luxury setting can communicate status. A dramatic photograph can communicate importance. These signals may contain legitimate information, but they can also be carefully constructed. This does not mean you should distrust appearances. It means you should understand what appearances can and cannot prove. The social proof of success. People often judge success through visible signals: followers, awards, luxury, connections, media appearances, testimonials, crowds. These signals can provide useful information, but they can also create an illusion of credibility. The question is not, does this person look successful? It is, what measurable evidence demonstrates the success being claimed? This shift from appearance to evidence is one of the most important habits in psychological self-defense. Perception and self-image. Perception is not only about how we see others, it is also about how we see ourselves. Your self-image influences your decisions. If you believe you are incapable, you may avoid opportunities. If you believe you must always appear strong, you may refuse help. If you believe you are always right, you may reject useful criticism. If you believe you are destined to fail, you may interpret setbacks as confirmation. In this sense, self-perception can become a psychological prison. The beliefs you hold about yourself influence what actions you consider possible. The identity trap. Identity can become especially powerful when people attach decisions to their self-concept. People like me don't do that. I am not the kind of person who changes my mind. Successful people never quit. Strong people don't ask for help. Such statements may sound empowering, sometimes they are limiting. A rigid identity can prevent adaptation. A person may continue making poor decisions simply because changing direction would conflict with the identity they have constructed. Psychological flexibility is therefore important. You can change your strategy without abandoning your values. You can admit an error without becoming a failure. You can change your mind without becoming weak. The perception gap. There is often a difference between how you see yourself and how others see you. This gap can be uncomfortable. You may believe you are decisive, while others experience you as controlling. You may believe you are honest, while others experience you as insensitive. You may believe you are confident, while others experience you as arrogant. Feedback can help reveal these gaps. But feedback must also be evaluated critically. Not every criticism is accurate. The objective is not to accept every opinion. It is to gather enough independent information to improve your self-understanding. Managing perception without deception. There is nothing inherently wrong with managing how others perceive you. Good communication requires presentation. Professionals build reputations, organizations build brands, leaders communicate values, individuals choose appropriate clothing for different environments. The ethical boundary appears when image is deliberately used to conceal important reality. There is a difference between presenting your strengths clearly and creating a false impression of strengths you do not possess. The first is communication. The second can become deception. The strongest reputation is therefore not manufactured. It is built through consistent behavior. The perception audit. When evaluating someone or yourself, perform a perception audit. Ask, what do I actually know? Separate observable facts from assumptions. What am I interpreting? Identify the meaning you have assigned to the facts. What expectations am I bringing? Your previous experiences may be influencing your judgment. What evidence contradicts my current view? Actively search for disconfirming information. What image is being presented? Separate presentation from substance. Who benefits from this perception? Would I reach the same conclusion without the reputation? This can reveal halo effects and prejudice. The most dangerous illusion, perhaps the greatest danger in perception, is believing that your perception is reality. It isn't. It is your current interpretation of reality. That distinction creates intellectual freedom. You can say, this is how I see it, but I may be missing something. That sentence is psychologically powerful. It keeps the mind open without making it gullible. It allows confidence without arrogance. It permits conviction without blindness. The final lesson. Perception is powerful because people respond to meaning. A person does not simply react to an event, they react to what they believe the event means. That is why reputation matters. That is why framing matters. That is why language matters. That is why stories matter. And that is why psychological influence often begins long before anyone makes an explicit request. But there is a deeper lesson. The person most vulnerable to manipulation is not necessarily the person who knows nothing about psychology. It may be the person who believes their own perception is infallible. The psychologically resilient person develops a different habit. Observe, interpret, question, verify, update. Do not surrender your judgment to appearances. Do not confuse confidence with competence. Do not confuse popularity with truth. Do not confuse reputation with character. Do not confuse a compelling story with complete reality. And never forget, perception may shape the world you experience, but perception itself must be examined. Once you learn to examine the lens through which you see the world, you become much harder to deceive, and much more capable of seeing people, situations, and yourself with clarity. Chapter 6. Words as Weapons. Words are among the most powerful instruments human beings possess. A sentence can calm a frightened person. A question can expose a contradiction. A compliment can build confidence. A warning can prevent disaster. A story can unite thousands of people around a common purpose. But words can also distort, intimidate, deceive, provoke, and manipulate. The danger is not that words possess supernatural power. The danger is that language influences attention, interpretation, emotion, and meaning. Whoever controls the language surrounding an event can sometimes influence how that event is understood. This is why language sits at the center of persuasion. The first weapon, framing. People rarely communicate facts without framing them. Consider these descriptions. He refused to compromise, or he stood firmly by his principles. The underlying behavior may be identical. The emotional interpretation is not. Words provide the psychological lens through which information is processed. A business may describe a difficult period as a strategic transition. An opponent may describe it as failure. A government may call a policy reform. Its critics may call the same policy restriction. The facts may remain unchanged while the emotional meaning changes. This is why critical thinkers learn to translate language into neutral descriptions. Ask, what actually happened beneath the labels? Labels create categories. Humans categorize. It makes information easier to process, but labels can become dangerous when they replace examination. Once someone is called brilliant, dishonest, dangerous, weak, successful, failure, people may begin interpreting every subsequent action through that label. The label becomes a shortcut. Instead of evaluating behavior independently, the mind asks, what would a person like this do? A better approach is to describe behavior before assigning identity. Instead of, he's manipulative, ask, what did he say or do that made me reach that conclusion? Behavior can be examined. Labels often encourage assumptions. The question is often more powerful than the statement. Statements tell people what to consider. Questions can determine what they consider. Compare, you don't really trust me, do you, with what information would help you feel comfortable with this decision. The first question embeds an assumption. The second invites independent evaluation. This is why questions can become powerful tools of influence. A question can direct attention, expose assumptions, create doubt, encourage reflection, or pressure someone toward a particular conclusion. The critical skill is learning to recognize the assumptions hidden inside questions. When someone asks, why are you afraid to take this opportunity? You do not have to accept the premise that fear is the reason. You can respond internally. Am I actually afraid, or is that simply the assumption contained in the question? That small distinction protects independent thought. Loaded questions. A loaded question contains an assumption that may not have been established. For example, when did you stop caring about the team? The question assumes that you stopped caring. The person answering may become trapped into defending themselves rather than challenging the premise. A useful response is, what makes you believe I stopped caring? The question has now been turned around. The hidden assumption must face examination. This is not about winning conversations. It is about refusing to accept an unsupported premise as fact. The power of repetition. Repeated information can become familiar. Familiarity can sometimes increase perceived credibility. This is one reason slogans, headlines, rumors, political messages, advertising claims, and repeated narratives can become psychologically influential. But repetition is not proof. A statement does not become true because it has been heard many times. The defense is simple. Separate familiarity from evidence. Ask, what is the original evidence for this claim, not how many times have I heard it. Euphemisms and emotional distance. Language can soften uncomfortable realities. Downsizing may sound less severe than job losses. Collateral damage can sound less emotionally direct than civilian harm. Revenue adjustment can sound more acceptable than price increase. Euphemisms are not automatically deceptive. Sometimes softer language is useful for professionalism or sensitivity. But euphemisms can also reduce emotional awareness by making difficult actions sound harmless. When evaluating an important issue, translate the language into concrete consequences. Ask, what does this actually mean for the people involved? Concrete language restores psychological clarity. Demonization. Another linguistic strategy is to reduce complex opponents to negative labels. Instead of examining an opposing argument, someone may call the opponent ignorant, corrupt, evil, crazy, enemy. Once an opponent becomes psychologically dehumanized or completely dismissed, their arguments may no longer receive serious evaluation. This creates intellectual danger. A person can be wrong about one issue and correct about another. An opponent can have bad motives and still make a valid argument. A disliked person can still tell the truth. The mature thinker evaluates claims independently of emotional allegiance. The language of certainty. Words such as obviously, everyone knows, there is no doubt, anyone intelligent can see, create an impression of certainty. Sometimes certainty is justified. Often it is rhetorical. Strong language can discourage questioning because disagreement begins to feel unreasonable. The defense is to ask, what evidence justifies this level of certainty? Confidence should be proportional to evidence. False dichotomies. Language can make complex situations appear to have only two choices. You're either with us or against us. Either you trust me or you don't. Either we act now or we lose everything. These statements can create psychological pressure by eliminating alternatives. But many situations contain several options. You can support a goal while disagreeing with a strategy. You can care about someone while rejecting their request. You can delay a decision without rejecting the opportunity. You can disagree without becoming an enemy. Whenever language presents only two possibilities, ask, what third option has been excluded? The language of obligation. Certain words create psychological pressure. You should, you must, you owe me. If you cared, you would. A good person would. These phrases may sometimes be reasonable, but they can also connect a decision to someone's identity or morality. A person may feel that refusing a request means becoming a bad friend, bad employee, bad parent, or bad person. This is powerful because humans generally want to maintain a positive self-image. The defense is to separate moral identity from individual decisions. You can be a good person and still say no. You can care about someone and still disagree. You can be generous and still maintain limits. The weaponization of silence. Words are not the only form of linguistic influence. Silence can communicate. A pause may signal thoughtfulness, but silence can also create uncertainty. Someone may deliberately stop responding because they know the uncertainty will cause another person to seek reassurance. Again, context matters. Not every period of silence is manipulation. People become busy. People need time. People sometimes need emotional space. The important question is whether silence forms part of a repeated pattern designed to control another person's behavior. Strategic vagueness. Vague language can create flexibility. We'll take care of it. You know what I mean. Something good is coming. Trust me. The problem with vague promises is that they can sound meaningful without committing the speaker to anything measurable. Specific language creates accountability. Instead of accepting, it will be handled. Ask, who will handle it? What exactly will be done? And by when? Clarity reduces the room available for deception. The power of storytelling. Humans understand information through narratives. A story can make complex information memorable. It can create emotional connection. It can help people understand abstract ideas. But stories can also overpower evidence. A compelling personal story may feel more convincing than statistical data, even when the statistics provide stronger evidence. This is sometimes called the identifiable victim effect. A vivid individual story can produce a stronger emotional response than information about a large population. Stories matter, but emotional impact should not automatically be confused with evidentiary strength. Ask, is this story representative or merely memorable? Precision as psychological defense. Manipulation often becomes harder when language becomes precise. Instead of, they always lie, ask, which statements were false? Instead of, everyone hates the idea, ask, how many people actually objected? Instead of, this is obviously the best option, ask, according to which criteria? Instead of you owe me, ask, what exactly did I agree to? Precision forces vague psychological claims into concrete territory. That is why precise questions can be so powerful. Words and identity. Language can also shape identity. Tell someone repeatedly, you're weak, and they may begin questioning themselves. Tell someone repeatedly, you're capable, and they may develop greater confidence. This demonstrates that language can influence self-perception, but it also creates responsibility. Do not allow someone else's repeated description of you to become unquestioned truth. You are not obligated to accept every label placed upon you. At the same time, avoid replacing one distortion with another. Self-confidence should be grounded in reality. The goal is not, I am perfect. The healthier position is, I can recognize my strengths, acknowledge my weaknesses, and continue developing. Listening for the hidden structure. When someone speaks, listen on several levels. Level 1, what are they saying? Identify the literal message. Level 2, what are they assuming? Look for premises that have not been established. Level 3, what emotion are they creating? Fear, guilt, excitement, anger, pride. Level 4, what do they want? Identify the desired outcome. Level 5, what information is missing? Consider what would change your interpretation if you knew it. This transforms passive listening into analytical listening. Your own words matter. The study of psychological language should not become an excuse to manipulate others. Your words shape your own relationships and reputation. If you exaggerate constantly, people eventually discount you. If you threaten casually, people learn to distrust you. If you promise what you cannot deliver, credibility deteriorates. If you use guilt whenever someone disagrees, relationships become psychologically unsafe. Strong communication therefore does not require domination. It requires clarity. Say what you mean what you say, avoid unnecessary ambiguity, acknowledge uncertainty, correct yourself when wrong, give people enough information to make informed decisions. That kind of communication creates influence without requiring deception. The verbal shield. When confronted with psychologically loaded language, several responses can restore clarity. What specifically do you mean? What evidence supports that? What assumption is behind that question? What are the alternatives? What happens if I say no? Why does this decision need to be made immediately? Can you give me that in specific terms? These questions are not weapons in the conventional sense. They are shields. They force the conversation out of emotional fog and into observable reality. The final lesson. Words become powerful when they influence how people perceive reality. A label can change interpretation. A question can introduce an assumption. A frame can change emphasis. A euphemism can soften consequences. A repeated claim can become familiar. A story can overpower statistics. A confident phrase can create an illusion of certainty. But language has another property. It can be examined. You do not have to accept the frame. You do not have to accept the label. You do not have to answer the assumption. You do not have to obey the emotional meaning attached to a sentence. You can slow down, ask for precision, separate facts from interpretations, and choose your own language carefully. The strongest communicator is not the person who can overwhelm everyone else with words. It is the person who can recognize what words are doing and remain capable of thinking beyond them. When you control your attention, question the frame, and demand clarity, words lose much of their power to control your judgment. Chapter 7. Reading people without reading minds. People are constantly trying to read one another. We watch facial expressions. We listen to tone. We notice pauses. We interpret gestures. We remember previous behavior. We compare what someone says with what they do. Then we construct a conclusion. He's nervous. She's hiding something. They don't trust me. He is confident. She is lying. Sometimes our interpretations are accurate. Sometimes they are completely wrong. The human desire to understand other people's minds is powerful, but it comes with a dangerous temptation, mistaking an observation for a fact. You can observe behavior. You cannot directly observe another person's thoughts. That distinction is the foundation of responsible people reading. You are not a mind reader. Human behavior contains clues. It does not provide perfect access to internal states. Someone avoiding eye contact might be uncomfortable. They might also be tired, distracted, culturally accustomed to different eye contact patterns, or simply thinking. Someone crossing their arms might be defensive. They might also be cold. Someone speaking rapidly might be nervous. They might simply be enthusiastic. Someone changing their story might be lying. They might also be confused, mistaken, or remembering events differently. This is why individual behavior should rarely be treated as definitive psychological evidence. The better approach is to think in probabilities. Not, this proves they are lying, but this behavior is inconsistent with what they said, so I should investigate further. That difference separates observation from speculation. Start with the baseline. One of the most useful concepts in behavioral observation is the baseline. A baseline is someone's ordinary pattern of behavior under normal circumstances. How do they normally speak? How quickly do they respond? How expressive are they? How much eye contact do they usually make? How do they normally behave under mild disagreement? Without a baseline, interpreting a single behavior becomes difficult. Suppose someone suddenly becomes unusually quiet. That change is more informative if they are normally talkative. Suppose someone suddenly becomes unusually defensive. That change may deserve attention if they are normally relaxed during disagreement. The important signal is often not the behavior itself. It is the change from the person's normal pattern. Context is king. Behavior must be interpreted within context. A nervous-looking person before a job interview is not necessarily deceptive. A quiet person at a funeral is not necessarily depressed. A person speaking loudly at a sporting event is not necessarily aggressive. A person checking their phone during a meeting may be distracted, or may be dealing with an urgent matter. Context changes meaning. Never interpret behavior in isolation when context is available. The more important the conclusion, the more context you should require. Words and behavior. One of the most useful observations in human psychology is the relationship between what people say and what they repeatedly do. Words communicate intentions. Behavior provides evidence about execution. Someone may say, "You can trust me," but trust is better evaluated through consistent behavior. Someone may say, "I respect your boundaries." The meaningful evidence is whether they actually respect them. Someone may say, "I always keep my promises." The evidence is their history of keeping promises. This does not mean words are worthless. It means credibility develops when words and behavior consistently align. Look for patterns, not moments. One unusual event tells you very little. A repeated pattern tells you much more. Someone forgets an appointment once. That may mean nothing. They repeatedly make promises and fail to keep them. Now a pattern is emerging. Someone becomes defensive once. That may be normal. They become defensive every time their actions are questioned. That pattern deserves attention. Behavioral analysis becomes stronger when it is based on repeated observations rather than isolated incidents. Inconsistency is a signal, not a verdict. Inconsistency can be informative. If someone's statements repeatedly conflict with independently verifiable facts, caution is reasonable. But inconsistency does not automatically prove deception. Memory is imperfect. People misunderstand questions. People change their minds. People communicate poorly. Details can become confused. Therefore, treat inconsistency as a signal for investigation, not as automatic proof of guilt. Ask, what could explain this inconsistency? Then investigate before concluding. Listening beyond the words. People communicate more than literal sentences. Tone matters. Pacing matters. Word choice matters. Pauses matter. But these signals are probabilistic, not magical. Someone who suddenly speaks more slowly may be choosing words carefully. Someone who becomes unusually detailed may be nervous or simply trying to be helpful. Someone who avoids a topic may be uncomfortable or may not understand what you are asking. Behavioral observation becomes useful when multiple signals converge. One clue is weak. Several independent clues pointing in the same direction are more informative. The danger of body language myths. Popular culture often presents body language as a secret code. If they touch their face, they're lying. If they avoid eye contact, they're guilty. If they cross their arms, they're defensive. These simplistic rules are unreliable. Human behavior is too complicated for a universal dictionary of gestures. Body language can provide context. It cannot function as a lie detector. A more disciplined approach is observe, form a hypothesis, seek additional evidence. Do not observe, declare certainty. The power of questions. Good questions reveal more than dramatic observation. Instead of attempting to decode every gesture, ask clear questions. Can you explain what happened? What did you mean by that? What changed? What evidence supports this? What would you do differently next time? Open-ended questions allow people to provide information without forcing them into a predetermined narrative. They also reveal whether the person can explain their position consistently. Listening for ownership. One useful behavioral signal is how people discuss responsibility. Consider the difference between "I made a mistake" and "here's what I'm doing to correct it." Everything went wrong because everyone else failed me. Neither statement proves character by itself, but repeated patterns of accountability or repeated avoidance of accountability can provide useful information. Healthy individuals are capable of acknowledging mistakes. They do not need to be perfect. They need to be capable of correction. Listening for specificity. Specificity can make communication easier to evaluate. Compare "everything is under control" with "the problem is X. We have completed Y, and Z remains unresolved." The second statement gives you something to examine. Vague confidence can sound impressive without providing evidence. Specific information allows verification. This is why good observers listen not only for what is said, but for whether statements contain testable substance. The consistency test. When evaluating trustworthiness, examine 3 dimensions. Words, what does the person claim? Actions, what do they actually do? Patterns, what happens repeatedly over time? The third category is particularly valuable. A single contradiction may be noise. A persistent gap between words and actions is more significant. The motive trap. People often try to explain behavior by assigning motives. She did that because she's jealous. He said that because he wants power. They are attacking me because they're insecure. Sometimes these explanations are correct, but motives are difficult to observe directly. The safer approach is to distinguish. Behavior. What did they do? Interpretation. What do I think it means? Hypothesis, what might explain it? Evidence, what supports that explanation? This prevents psychological storytelling from becoming mistaken for fact. Projection. Sometimes we interpret others through our own psychology. A dishonest person may assume everyone else is dishonest. An insecure person may interpret neutral behavior as rejection. A highly competitive person may assume every interaction is competition. A person who constantly seeks approval may overestimate how much others care about social judgment. This is called projection, when aspects of one's own thoughts, feelings, or motives are attributed to others. Self-awareness therefore improves people reading. Before analyzing someone else, ask, could my own expectations be influencing what I see? The confirmation trap. Once you form a theory about someone, your brain may begin collecting evidence that supports it. Suppose you decide, this person doesn't respect me. Their next interruption becomes evidence. Their next disagreement becomes evidence. Their next delayed response becomes evidence. But moments when they listen carefully may receive less attention. This is confirmation bias in action. The defense is deliberate disconfirmation. Ask, what behavior would prove my current interpretation wrong? If you cannot imagine any evidence that would change your mind, you may no longer be investigating. You may simply be defending a conclusion. Psychological safety and trust. Reading people should not become constant suspicion. If every gesture is treated as evidence of hidden motives, relationships become exhausting. Trust requires some willingness to interpret uncertainty generously. A healthy approach is calibrated trust. Do not trust everyone blindly. Do not distrust everyone automatically. Instead, allow trust to grow according to evidence. Small commitments reveal reliability. Repeated interactions reveal consistency. Difficult situations reveal character more clearly than easy situations. Time provides information. The art of listening. One of the best ways to understand people is surprisingly simple. Listen, not merely to prepare your response. Listen to understand. Notice what they emphasize. Notice what they avoid. Notice what they repeatedly return to. Notice what they become passionate about. Notice how they describe other people. Notice how they respond to disagreement. Notice whether they can tolerate correction. Notice whether their behavior changes when they have power. These observations can reveal more than attempts to decode isolated facial movements. Behavior under pressure. Pressure can reveal patterns that ordinary circumstances conceal. When everything is going well, almost anyone can appear patient. Difficulty creates a stronger test. How does the person respond when they lose, they are criticized, they are told no, they make a mistake, they encounter someone more powerful, they have something significant to lose? These situations can reveal behavioral tendencies. But again, avoid absolute conclusions. One bad reaction does not define an entire person. Patterns matter. The difference between detection and diagnosis. Behavioral observation can help you identify patterns. It cannot give you a reliable psychological diagnosis from casual interaction. Do not diagnose strangers from social media videos. Do not label someone a psychopath because they seem cold. Do not call someone a narcissist because they enjoy attention. Clinical diagnosis requires appropriate assessment and expertise. The purpose of people reading is not to attach dramatic labels. It is to make better decisions about communication, boundaries, cooperation, and trust. A practical observation framework. When you need to understand someone's behavior, use this sequence. 1. Observe. Record what actually happened. 2. Establish the baseline. Ask whether this behavior is unusual for the person. 3. Consider context. Identify circumstances that could explain the behavior. 4. Generate multiple explanations. Do not settle immediately on one motive. 5. Look for patterns. Examine repeated behavior. 6. Compare words and actions. Look for consistency. 7. Verify important claims. Use independent evidence where possible. 8. Update your conclusion. Change your assessment when new evidence appears. This process is slower than pretending to possess a secret ability to read minds. It is also far more reliable. The final lesson: reading people is not about becoming a human lie detector. It is about becoming a careful observer. Watch patterns, listen carefully, understand context, separate behavior from interpretation, distinguish evidence from intuition, allow hypotheses to remain hypotheses until evidence strengthens them, and never forget that other people are complex human beings whose internal experiences cannot be perfectly inferred from external behavior. The goal is not certainty. The goal is better judgment. You do not need to know exactly what someone is thinking to make a wise decision about how to interact with them. You only need to know what the evidence reasonably supports. That is the real skill. Do not pretend to read minds, learn to read patterns, and when the evidence is incomplete, have the discipline to say, "I don't know yet." That sentence may be less dramatic than claiming to see through everyone, but psychologically, it is far more powerful. Chapter 8. The Dark Side of Persuasion. Persuasion is one of the foundations of civilization. Every day people attempt to change minds. A teacher persuades a student to study. A leader persuades a team to pursue a goal. A lawyer persuades a jury. A business persuades customers to buy. A parent persuades a child to make a better decision. A friend persuades another friend to reconsider a mistake. Persuasion becomes dark when the objective shifts from helping someone make a choice to undermining their ability to choose freely and intelligently. The difference can be subtle. A persuasive person presents reasons. A manipulative person may conceal the real objective. A persuasive person accepts refusal. A coercive person treats refusal as a problem to overcome. A persuasive person provides relevant information. A manipulative person may selectively present information to produce a predetermined response. Understanding that boundary is essential, because the darkest forms of persuasion do not feel like persuasion, they feel like your own decision. The illusion of free choice. One of the most sophisticated forms of influence occurs when people believe they arrived at a conclusion independently. The person was not physically forced. No obvious threat was made. No command was issued. Instead, the environment was carefully shaped. Certain information was emphasized. Other information was minimized. Emotions were activated. Alternatives were narrowed. Social pressure was introduced. The desired choice was made easier. The result may look voluntary, but the decision-making environment was heavily engineered. This is why psychological awareness matters. Freedom of choice is not simply the absence of physical force. It also requires a reasonable opportunity to understand what you are choosing. Persuasion versus coercion. A useful distinction is autonomy. Healthy persuasion leaves room for refusal. Coercion makes refusal costly through threats, intimidation, punishment, or severe pressure. Imagine someone saying, "Here is my argument. Take some time and decide." That is persuasion. Now imagine, "Agree now, or I will make sure you regret refusing." That is coercion. The difference is not merely intensity. It is whether the person's freedom to choose is being respected. The gradual escalation manipulation does not always begin with something extreme. Sometimes it develops gradually. A small boundary is tested, then another. A minor demand becomes normal. A slightly larger demand follows. The person learns that resistance produces discomfort, while compliance produces relief. Over time, the acceptable boundary moves. This is one reason early recognition matters. A behavior that seems insignificant in isolation can become important when viewed as part of a pattern. Ask, is this an isolated event, or is the level of pressure increasing over time? Dependency is a source of power. Persuasion becomes more dangerous when one person becomes heavily dependent upon another. Dependency can involve money, information, access, emotional support, employment, social belonging, professional opportunities, or decision-making. The more difficult it becomes to function independently, the greater the potential power imbalance. Healthy relationships can involve mutual dependence. The danger arises when dependency is deliberately created or exploited to make resistance difficult. A powerful defense is maintaining multiple sources of support where possible. Independence reduces vulnerability. Isolation. Isolation can intensify influence. When people lose access to independent perspectives, the information environment becomes narrower. They hear one interpretation repeatedly. Alternative explanations disappear. The influencer becomes the primary source of information, reassurance, approval, or guidance. This can create psychological dependence. A healthy relationship does not require the destruction of outside relationships. If someone consistently discourages you from speaking with trusted people, seeking independent advice, or questioning their claims, that deserves attention. Information control. Persuasion becomes darker when information is deliberately controlled. A person may provide only the evidence that supports their position. They may hide important consequences. They may discourage independent research. They may dismiss contradictory evidence without examining it. The objective is not necessarily to make someone believe a false statement. Sometimes it is simply to prevent them from encountering information that would change their decision. This produces a powerful principle. Control of information can become control of the decision environment. The defense is independent verification. For important decisions, do not rely entirely on the person who benefits from your decision. The manufactured enemy, a particularly powerful psychological strategy, is creating an enemy. The world becomes divided into us versus them. Once this division is established, criticism from outsiders can be dismissed automatically. They don't understand us. They're trying to destroy what we're building. Anyone who disagrees is against us. Group loyalty becomes stronger. Independent thinking becomes harder. This dynamic can appear in politics, organizations, online communities, workplaces, and even personal relationships. The defense is intellectual independence. Ask, can someone disagree with this position without becoming an enemy? If disagreement itself is treated as betrayal, psychological pressure may be operating. Fear as a persuasive accelerator. Fear can accelerate decisions because it creates a desire for immediate relief. The pattern is often threat, anxiety, solution. The person presenting the solution may then appear unusually valuable. This does not mean every warning is manipulation. Real dangers exist. The key question is proportionality. Is the response appropriate to the actual threat? Is the evidence strong? Are alternative solutions available? Is the person creating fear also benefiting from the solution? The greater the emotional intensity, the more important independent verification becomes. Hope as leverage. Fear is not the only emotional lever. Hope can be equally powerful. People want transformation. They want success. They want recognition. They want belonging. They want relief. They want a better future. A persuasive message can become dangerous when it promises extraordinary outcomes while minimizing uncertainty and risk. This will change your life. This is the opportunity you've been waiting for. Everything will be different once you do this. Hope is not foolish, but hope should not replace evidence. The right question is, what is realistically supported by the available evidence? The charisma trap. Charisma can increase persuasive power. Charismatic individuals often communicate confidence, enthusiasm, certainty, and emotional energy. These qualities can be valuable, but charisma is not character. A charismatic person can be honest. A charismatic person can also be deceptive. The ability to inspire does not automatically establish the truth of what is being communicated. Evaluate the message independently from the messenger. That is one of the simplest ways to reduce charisma bias. The authority trap. Authority can produce compliance even when the underlying instruction deserves examination. Titles, uniforms, institutional positions, credentials, and reputation can all create legitimate reasons for trust. But legitimate authority has boundaries. A person's expertise should be relevant to the claim being made. A person's position should not eliminate your ability to ask reasonable questions. A healthy authority can withstand scrutiny. A fragile authority demands unquestioning obedience. The persuasion of shame. Shame can make people desperate to restore social acceptance. Someone may imply, "What kind of person would refuse this? Everyone else is willing to do it. You're embarrassing yourself." The target begins focusing on social judgment instead of the substance of the decision. The defense is to separate embarrassment from evidence. Ask, if nobody knew about my decision, would I still choose this? If the answer changes dramatically, social pressure may be influencing the decision more than the actual merits. When persuasion becomes psychological control, there is no single moment when every persuasive interaction becomes manipulation. But certain patterns should raise concern. Repeated pressure after a clear refusal, deliberate deception, threats or intimidation, isolation from independent support, deliberate exploitation of vulnerabilities, control over essential information, punishment for questioning, engineered dependency, repeated attacks on self-confidence, attempts to make the person doubt their own judgment. These patterns matter more than isolated incidents. The objective is not to label someone, it is to recognize whether your autonomy is being systematically reduced. Protecting the decision-making process. One of the best forms of psychological defense is protecting the process through which you make decisions. Slow down. Do not allow unnecessary urgency to determine your timetable. Verify. Check important claims independently. Diversify information. Do not rely on one source when the stakes are high. Seek outside perspectives. Trusted, independent people can reveal blind spots. Preserve options. Avoid unnecessary dependency on one person or institution. Document important agreements. Written records can reduce confusion and disputes. Maintain boundaries. A refusal should not automatically become the beginning of a negotiation. Reassess. If new information appears, reconsider the decision. These habits do not make you cynical. They make you harder to manipulate. Persuasion without domination. There is a better model of influence. Present the truth as you understand it. Explain your reasoning. Acknowledge uncertainty. Allow questions. Respect disagreement. Accept refusal. Give people time when circumstances permit. This form of persuasion can still be powerful. In fact, it can create something manipulative influence cannot reliably create: genuine trust. People are more likely to remain committed when they believe they were respected during the decision-making process. The ultimate test. Whenever you encounter powerful persuasion, ask 5 questions. What does this person want me to do? What emotion is making the decision feel urgent? What information might I be missing? What happens if I refuse? Would I make the same decision if the pressure disappeared? These questions expose much of the hidden architecture behind influence. They move your attention away from emotional intensity and toward decision quality. The darkest form of persuasion. The darkest form of persuasion is not simply convincing someone to do something. It is creating conditions in which the person gradually loses confidence in their own ability to decide. Once someone believes, "I can't trust myself," the influencer may become the substitute for independent judgment. That is why psychological self-confidence matters. Not arrogance, not stubbornness, not the belief that you are always right. Rather, the confidence that you can examine evidence, seek help, change your mind, and make your own decisions. The final lesson: persuasion is part of human life. You cannot eliminate influence, and you should not want to. A world in which nobody could persuade anyone would be a world without teaching, leadership, negotiation, cooperation, or meaningful communication. The objective is therefore not to become impossible to influence. It is to remain capable of choosing. Listen to arguments, consider evidence, learn from others. Allow yourself to change your mind, but protect the core of your autonomy, because there is a fundamental difference between someone saying, "Here is why I think you should choose this," and someone creating a psychological environment in which you feel you have no acceptable choice. One is persuasion, the other is control. And the more clearly you understand that distinction, the harder it becomes for anyone to turn your emotions, relationships, fears, or beliefs into instruments for controlling your decisions. Chapter 9. Social Games and Hidden Agendas. Human interaction is rarely as simple as the words being spoken. A conversation may appear to be about business while actually being about status. A disagreement may appear to be about facts while being driven by pride. A friendship may appear to be based on affection, while one person is primarily seeking access, influence, or approval. A meeting may appear collaborative, while participants are quietly competing for recognition. This does not mean everyone is secretly manipulating everyone else. It means human beings have multiple motives, and those motives are not always stated explicitly. Understanding this distinction is the beginning of social intelligence. The game beneath the game. Every social environment has visible and invisible elements. The visible layer consists of what people say, what they ask for, what they promise, what they openly discuss. The deeper layer may involve status, belonging, recognition, security, influence, competition, reputation, access, or fear of losing position. Imagine a workplace meeting where 2 people debate which proposal is better. On the surface, the discussion concerns the proposal. Underneath, one person may also want recognition from leadership. Another may be protecting their previous decision. A third may be trying to establish authority. The discussion is therefore not necessarily a single game. It may be several games happening simultaneously. Motives are not always malicious. This is where inexperienced observers often make a mistake. Discovering that someone has a hidden motive does not automatically mean they are deceptive. People naturally have multiple interests. A student may want to learn and also want a good grade. An employee may want to help the organization and also want career advancement. A leader may care about the team and also care about reputation. A friend may genuinely care about you and still want something from the relationship. Mixed motives are normal. The important question is not, does this person have a motive? Everyone does. The better question is, are they being honest about the interests that materially affect the situation? The status game. Status is one of the most powerful forces in human groups. People may compete for authority, recognition, influence, access, respect, leadership, or social approval. Status competition is not necessarily destructive. Healthy competition can encourage achievement. But status games become problematic when people begin undermining one another rather than improving their own performance. Watch for patterns such as taking credit for others' work, deliberately excluding someone from important information, interrupting to establish dominance, minimizing another person's contribution, using popularity instead of evidence, creating unnecessary rivalries. The best response is not to become obsessed with status. Build credibility through competence, consistency, and constructive relationships. The alliance game. Groups naturally form alliances. People who share goals tend to cooperate. This can be healthy, but alliances can also create divisions. A group may gradually develop an internal identity. We understand what is really happening, and an external identity. They don't understand. This creates cohesion, but it can also discourage independent thinking. A healthy alliance can tolerate disagreement. A psychologically unhealthy alliance may require loyalty at the expense of judgment. Ask, can I disagree with this group and still belong? If the answer is no, the social environment deserves careful examination. The reciprocity game. Social relationships often involve exchange. One person helps another. Another returns the favor. This is normal. The problem occurs when generosity becomes a mechanism for creating indefinite obligation. A person may repeatedly remind you of what they have done for you. The relationship gradually becomes a ledger. Every favor creates a debt. Every disagreement becomes evidence of ingratitude. Healthy reciprocity does not require permanent psychological indebtedness. Gratitude is valuable. So is autonomy. The gatekeeper. Some people occupy positions that control access. They may control information, opportunities, introductions, resources, approval, or social acceptance. Because access has value, gatekeepers can possess significant influence. This does not make gatekeeping inherently wrong. Organizations need people who manage access. The concern arises when access is deliberately used to create unnecessary dependency. A person may communicate, "You need me to get anywhere." The psychological effect is powerful. The target may become reluctant to challenge the gatekeeper because they fear losing access. The defense is diversification. Where possible, develop multiple relationships, sources of information, and pathways to opportunity. The information game. Information creates advantage. Knowing something before others know it can influence negotiations, decisions, and relationships. But information can be managed in many ways. Someone may reveal information selectively. They may delay information. They may emphasize one fact while ignoring another. They may communicate different versions of the same situation to different people. This does not automatically prove deception, but information asymmetry should make you more careful. Ask, what does this person know that I don't? And, how might that difference affect the decision? The reputation game. People care about how others perceive them. Reputation therefore becomes a form of social capital. A person with a strong reputation may receive opportunities more easily. A person with a damaged reputation may face skepticism. Because reputation matters, people sometimes manage impressions carefully. They may highlight successes. They may minimize failures. They may associate themselves with respected individuals. They may carefully curate what others see. Again, image management is not automatically dishonest. The important question is whether the public image remains consistent with the underlying reality. The victim position. Victimhood can sometimes become part of a social dynamic. Someone may genuinely have been harmed and deserve support. A person may repeatedly position themselves as the injured party whenever challenged. The pattern can become challenge, hurt, sympathy, accountability disappears. This is why compassion and accountability should not be treated as opposites. A person's pain can be real, while their behavior is still worthy of examination. You can acknowledge someone's feelings without automatically accepting their interpretation of events. The hero position. The opposite social role is the rescuer. Some people become psychologically invested in being the person who saves others. They solve every problem. They provide every answer. They become indispensable. This can create a powerful identity. But if someone needs others to remain dependent upon them in order to maintain their own sense of importance, the relationship can become unhealthy. Real support should ultimately increase another person's capacity, not permanently eliminate it. The scarcity game. Scarcity increases perceived value. Only a few places remain. This opportunity is available to selected people. You may never get another chance. Sometimes scarcity is genuine. Sometimes it is simply a persuasive frame. The important question is the scarcity objective or manufactured? If the opportunity genuinely has limited availability, urgency may be justified. If scarcity exists primarily as a psychological pressure tactic, slowing down can restore perspective. The social proof game. People often look to others when uncertain. If everyone appears to support an idea, the idea can seem more credible. This is social proof. It is useful because other people's behavior can contain information. But popularity does not equal truth. A crowd can be correct. A crowd can also be wrong. Ask, are people supporting this because they independently evaluated it, or because everyone else appears to support it? That question exposes groupthink. The coalition trap. When disagreement emerges, people may recruit allies. Instead of resolving the issue directly, they begin collecting supporters. Soon, the original disagreement becomes a group conflict. The psychological stakes rise. Changing your mind becomes harder, because doing so may feel like betraying your side. This is why some disagreements become dramatically larger than the original issue. When possible, distinguish the problem from the coalition surrounding the problem. Do not allow a disagreement to automatically become a war between identities. Hidden agendas and evidence. How can you recognize a possible hidden agenda without becoming suspicious of everyone? Look for convergence. Suppose someone repeatedly directs conversations toward one outcome, benefits from that outcome, selectively provides supporting information, discourages independent verification, and becomes resistant when alternatives are considered. No single behavior proves manipulation. Together, however, the pattern deserves closer examination. The principle is, patterns are more informative than isolated signals. Ask who benefits. One of the oldest analytical questions remains useful. Who benefits? If someone strongly recommends a particular decision, determine whether they benefit from your choice. A salesperson benefits from a purchase. A manager may benefit from a particular project succeeding. A friend may benefit emotionally from your decision. A competitor may benefit from your failure. Having an interest does not make someone dishonest, but knowing the interest helps you evaluate the advice. Separate interest from evidence. This distinction is crucial. Suppose someone benefits from your decision. That does not automatically mean their recommendation is wrong. Their recommendation could still be excellent. The correct response is not, you benefit, therefore you are lying. It is, you benefit, therefore I should evaluate the evidence independently. That is a much stronger position. The exit test. A useful way to evaluate a social relationship is to observe what happens when you exercise independence. Can you say no? Can you disagree? Can you spend time with other people? Can you ask questions? Can you make an independent decision? Can you change your mind? Healthy relationships generally tolerate autonomy. Relationships built around control often become unstable when independence increases. The response to your independence can reveal more than the person's response to your agreement. Don't invent hidden agendas. There is another danger in studying social psychology. You can become so focused on hidden motives that you start seeing them everywhere. A person may forget to reply because they are busy. A colleague may disagree because they genuinely hold a different opinion. A friend may give advice because they care. Not every action contains a secret strategy. This is why evidence matters. Suspicion without evidence is not psychological intelligence. It is speculation. The goal is calibrated awareness. The social intelligence framework. When entering an important social situation, ask 5 questions. 1. What is being said? Identify the explicit issue. 2. What does each person want? Identify the visible and possible underlying interests. 3. Who benefits from each outcome? Look for incentives. 4. What information is missing? Identify uncertainty. 5. Can disagreement remain safe? Observe whether people can question the prevailing position without punishment. These questions provide a useful map without requiring mind reading. The strongest position. The strongest person in a social game is not necessarily the person with the most power. It may be the person who understands the dynamics without becoming psychologically trapped by them. They can cooperate without becoming dependent. They can compete without becoming consumed. They can build alliances without surrendering judgment. They can recognize status without worshiping it. They can listen to influential people without assuming influential people are always correct. They understand that every social environment contains incentives, and they remain capable of walking away from games that violate their values or autonomy. The final lesson: social life is full of games. Some are harmless, some are competitive, some are cooperative, some are unconscious, some are deliberate. The mature observer does not assume that every interaction is a conspiracy. Instead, they develop the ability to recognize incentives, patterns, alliances, information flows, and power differences. They ask, what is happening? What does each person want? What incentives are operating? What information is missing? What happens if I disagree? And most importantly, am I still making my own decisions? That final question is the safeguard against becoming trapped in someone else's game. You do not need to expose every hidden motive. You do not need to outmaneuver everyone. You simply need enough awareness to recognize when the social environment is influencing your judgment, and enough independence to choose your response deliberately. The greatest social intelligence is not seeing enemies everywhere. It is seeing the game clearly without losing yourself inside it. Chapter 10. The Manipulator's Mirror. The most dangerous manipulation is not always the manipulation you can see in someone else. Sometimes, it is the manipulation you are capable of using yourself. Every human being possesses the capacity to influence. We persuade. We negotiate. We withhold information. We seek approval. We appeal to emotions. We defend our reputation. We attempt to get what we want. Most of these behaviors are ordinary parts of human interaction. The problem begins when influence becomes deception, exploitation, coercion, or deliberate interference with another person's ability to choose freely. The mirror therefore asks an uncomfortable question. What if the person I need to understand most is myself? The mirror principle. When studying dark psychology, it is easy to imagine the manipulator as someone else: the dishonest salesperson, the controlling leader, the calculating friend, the intimidating colleague, the charismatic fraudster. But manipulation is not a personality trait possessed exclusively by villains. Under pressure, fear, insecurity, ambition, jealousy, or desperation, ordinary people can use manipulative behaviors. The mature student of psychology therefore examines both sides. How am I being influenced, and how might I be influencing others? That second question requires greater honesty. Influence begins with desire. Manipulation usually starts with an objective. You want something: attention, approval, money, recognition, control, affection, status, security, agreement. The desire itself is not necessarily wrong. The important question is what you are willing to do to obtain it. There is a psychological boundary between how can I communicate my needs clearly and how can I make this person do what I want without them realizing what I'm doing. The first is communication. The second moves toward manipulation. The self-justification machine. Human beings are remarkably capable of explaining their own behavior in favorable terms. When we manipulate, we may call it being strategic. When we conceal information, we may call it protecting them. When we pressure someone, we may call it helping them make the right decision. When we seek control, we may call it taking responsibility. When we retaliate, we may call it teaching them a lesson. The behavior has not changed, only the story surrounding it has changed. This is why self-examination requires more than asking, did I have a good reason? Ask, would I consider this behavior acceptable if someone used it against me? That question can expose self-deception, the double standard. One of the clearest signs of self-deception is the double standard. When someone else interrupts you, you call them disrespectful. When you interrupt them, you call it enthusiasm. When someone refuses to explain themselves, you call them suspicious. When you refuse to explain yourself, you call it privacy. When someone changes their mind, you call them inconsistent. When you change your mind, you call it adaptation. The mirror asks, would I judge my own behavior the same way if another person did it to me? If the answer is no, examine why. Emotional manipulation of others. People can learn that certain emotional reactions produce desired outcomes. Someone becomes angry, and others surrender. Someone becomes silent, and another person apologizes. Someone becomes extremely emotional, and everyone abandons the original issue. Someone threatens to withdraw affection, and the other person complies. Once a pattern works repeatedly, it can become habitual. The person may eventually use the reaction automatically. This is why self-awareness matters. Do I communicate my needs, or do I create emotional consequences until people give me what I want? That distinction is uncomfortable, but important. The control addiction. Control can become psychologically rewarding. When others comply, uncertainty decreases. The person feels powerful. When others resist, anxiety rises. They push harder. Eventually, control becomes the objective rather than cooperation. This can appear in families, friendships, organizations, and leadership environments. But control has a paradox. The more you try to control people, the less genuine their cooperation becomes. People may comply externally while becoming resentful internally. Leadership built on fear may produce obedience. Leadership built on trust produces commitment. Manipulation through information. Information can become a form of power. You may know something someone else needs. You may possess information that could change their decision. You may choose what to reveal and what to withhold. Sometimes withholding information is legitimate. Privacy exists. Confidentiality exists. Not every fact must be disclosed in every conversation. But when you deliberately hide material information because you know disclosure would cause someone to reject your proposal, you should examine your motives. Ask, am I protecting legitimate privacy, or am I protecting my desired outcome? That distinction can reveal the ethics of the situation. The need to win. Some people turn every disagreement into a contest. They do not merely want to solve the problem, they want to win. Winning can become more important than truth. Once this happens, people may distort arguments, interrupt, embarrass opponents, selectively quote information, refuse to acknowledge mistakes, attack character instead of ideas. The mirror asks, if proving me wrong would produce a better outcome, would I accept it? If the answer is no, ego may have replaced reasoning. The manipulator's favorite victim, ego. Ego can manipulate us from within. You may refuse to apologize because you believe apologizing makes you weak. You may continue a bad project because admitting failure feels humiliating. You may reject advice because it comes from someone you consider less important. You may remain in an argument because leaving feels like losing. The ego does not need another person to control you. It can do the job itself. Psychological maturity requires the ability to say, I was wrong. That sentence can protect you from enormous amounts of unnecessary damage. The power of admitting uncertainty. Manipulation often thrives on false certainty. The desire to appear confident can tempt people to exaggerate what they know. But genuine strength includes intellectual humility. You can say, I don't know, I need more information, I may have misunderstood, I was wrong. These statements do not weaken authority. Used appropriately, they strengthen credibility. A person who can revise their position based on evidence is harder to trap, both by others and by their own ego. The reciprocity trap you create. Remember the power of obligation? You can create it yourself. You help someone with the expectation that they will eventually repay you. Then, when they do not, resentment appears. After everything I've done for you. But perhaps you never clearly communicated that your help came with conditions. The mirror asks, was my generosity actually generosity, or was it an unspoken transaction? Healthy generosity does not secretly become a bill. If something is conditional, communicate the condition clearly. The rescue pattern. Some people constantly rescue others. They solve every problem. They give advice nobody requested. They intervene constantly. They become indispensable. But rescuing can sometimes become a form of control. If someone must remain dependent on you for you to feel valuable, your help may unintentionally preserve their dependence. A healthier question is, does my support increase this person's capacity to function independently? The best help eventually creates more capability, not permanent dependence. The mirror test. Before attempting to influence someone, ask yourself, what do I want? Be honest about the desired outcome. Why do I want it? Identify the underlying motivation. What information does the other person need? Consider what would allow them to make an informed choice. Would I accept their refusal? This tests whether you genuinely respect autonomy. Am I using fear, guilt, shame, or intimidation? If so, examine why. Would I behave differently if someone else were watching? This can reveal hidden motives. Would I accept the same tactic used against me? This exposes double standards. The difference between strategy and manipulation. Strategy is not inherently manipulative. Planning carefully is strategy. Negotiating is strategy. Choosing the right time to communicate is strategy. Understanding incentives is strategy. Preparing for objections is strategy. Manipulation enters when strategy depends on deception, coercion, exploitation, or deliberately undermining another person's informed choice. A strategic person asks, how can we reach a good outcome? A manipulative person may ask, how can I make them do what I want? The difference is subtle, but fundamental. The mirror in leadership. Leaders have unusual opportunities to influence people. That creates unusual responsibility. A leader can use authority to develop people or to control them. A leader can create psychological safety or create fear. A leader can invite disagreement or punish it. A leader can give credit or steal it. The mirror therefore becomes particularly important for anyone with authority. Ask, do people follow me because they trust me or because they are afraid of what happens if they don't? The answer reveals something important about the kind of influence you have built. The mirror in relationships. Relationships reveal manipulation quickly because repeated interaction exposes patterns. Ask yourself, do I respect boundaries? Do I apologize when wrong? Do I use silence to punish? Do I make people feel guilty when they disagree? Do I threaten to withdraw affection? Do I exaggerate problems to obtain attention? Do I listen only when I want something? Do I respect another person's independence? These questions are not accusations. They are diagnostic questions for self-reflection. The strongest form of influence. There is an interesting paradox at the heart of psychological influence. The more you respect another person's freedom, the more trustworthy your influence becomes. If someone knows they can disagree with you without being punished, your arguments carry more weight. If someone knows you will tell them relevant information even when it weakens your position, your credibility increases. If someone knows you will accept their no, your yes becomes more meaningful. Trust creates influence without coercion. The final lesson. The study of dark psychology can become dangerous if it teaches you only how to identify weaknesses in others. Every technique you learn can become a mirror. You learn about emotional leverage, ask how you use emotion. You learn about social pressure, ask how you apply pressure. You learn about framing, ask how you frame your own arguments. Ask whether your own motives are transparent. You learn about manipulation. Ask whether you manipulate. That is the real test of psychological intelligence. The objective is not to become the person who can control everyone in the room. It is to become the person who understands influence so deeply that they recognize it in others and in themselves. Because the most difficult mind to analyze is often your own, and the most dangerous manipulator may not be standing across the table. Sometimes the manipulator is the voice inside your own head saying, I had no choice. They deserved it. I was only helping. I had to win. The outcome justified what I did. The mirror does not ask you to become perfect. It asks you to become honest. Master your motives before attempting to master influence. That is where psychological power becomes self-mastery, rather than domination. Chapter 11. Dark Personality Patterns. Human beings are complicated. Some people are generous but ambitious. Others are confident but insecure. Someone can be charming in one situation and difficult in another. A person may behave selfishly under pressure, yet demonstrate genuine compassion at other times. This complexity makes psychological labeling dangerous. The purpose of studying so-called dark personality patterns should not be to diagnose people from a distance or turn ordinary flaws into evidence of evil. It is to recognize recurring behaviors that can create unhealthy, exploitative, or destructive relationships. The key word is pattern. One selfish act does not define a person. One lie does not establish a personality disorder. One angry reaction does not reveal someone's entire character. Repeated behavior across different circumstances provides much stronger evidence. The dark personality concept. Psychology sometimes discusses a cluster of socially aversive traits known as the dark triad. Narcissism, excessive self-focus, entitlement, and desire for admiration. Machiavellianism, a tendency towards strategic manipulation, cynicism, and exploitation. Psychopathy, traits involving low empathy, shallow emotional responsiveness, impulsivity, and disregard for others. These are psychological constructs, not convenient labels for anyone you dislike. People can display individual traits to varying degrees without meeting criteria for a clinical diagnosis. That distinction matters. The objective is not find the psychopath. The objective is recognize behaviors that may create risk. Pattern 1, entitlement. Entitlement is the expectation that one deserves special treatment. It can sound like, I shouldn't have to follow the rules. I deserve this. People should make exceptions for me. Healthy confidence says, I know my value. Entitlement says, my value means the rules should not apply to me. Watch for repeated disregard for fairness, especially when someone becomes hostile whenever they are treated like everyone else. The important evidence is not what someone believes about themselves. It is how their belief affects their treatment of others. Pattern 2, the hunger for admiration. Some people strongly depend upon recognition. They want to be praised. They want to be noticed. They want their accomplishments acknowledged. Wanting recognition is completely normal. The problem arises when admiration becomes an emotional necessity and criticism becomes intolerable. A person may constantly redirect conversations toward themselves. They may exaggerate accomplishments. They may become resentful when someone else receives attention. They may treat disagreement as disrespect. Again, one instance proves little. Pattern 3, strategic charm. Charm can be genuine. Some people are naturally warm, engaging, humorous, and persuasive, but charm can also be used strategically. A person may become exceptionally pleasant when they want something, and noticeably different when the objective has been achieved. The important question is not, is this person charming? It is their treatment of people consistent when they have nothing to gain? Character becomes easier to evaluate when incentives disappear. Pattern 4, lack of accountability. Everyone makes mistakes. The difference lies in how people respond afterward. A psychologically healthy response might be, I made a mistake. Here's what happened, and here's how I'll correct it. A persistent pattern of avoiding responsibility may look different. It wasn't my fault. They made me do it. Everyone else failed. You misunderstood. A person who never accepts responsibility can create exhausting relationships because every problem becomes somebody else's fault. The important question is, can this person acknowledge wrongdoing without immediately constructing an excuse? Pattern 5, exploitation. Exploitation occurs when someone's needs, trust, resources, or vulnerabilities are repeatedly used primarily for another person's benefit. Examples can include taking credit for another person's work, repeatedly borrowing without reciprocating, using someone's loyalty while offering little in return, exploiting someone's insecurity, manipulating someone's generosity. Healthy relationships contain reciprocity. They do not require perfect equality in every interaction, but there should generally be some recognition that the other person matters. A repeated pattern of one-sided benefit deserves attention. Pattern 6, low empathy. Empathy involves recognizing and taking seriously another person's emotional experience. Nobody is perfectly empathetic. People become distracted. They misunderstand. They sometimes respond badly. But a persistent inability or unwillingness to consider how one's actions affect others can become problematic. Watch what happens when someone is told, that hurt me. Do they become curious? Do they listen? Do they dismiss the experience completely? Do they mock vulnerability? Do they attempt to repair the damage? The response to another person's pain can reveal more than a polished public image. Pattern 7, manipulative communication. Manipulative communication can include guilt-inducing statements, deliberate misinformation, intimidation, persistent pressure, misleading omissions, attacks on character, exploiting personal vulnerabilities. Again, context matters. People sometimes communicate badly without having a calculated agenda. The important distinction is whether the behavior becomes repeated, purposeful, and resistant to correction. Pattern 8. Emotional volatility. Strong emotions do not automatically indicate a dark personality. Anger, sadness, frustration, and excitement are normal human experiences. The concern is a recurring pattern in which emotional volatility becomes a method of controlling other people. For example, if everyone in a group learns, we have to agree with this person because disagreement always produces an intimidating reaction, then emotional behavior has become a source of social power. The question is not simply, does this person get angry? It is, what happens to other people when this person becomes angry? Pattern 9, contempt. Contempt goes beyond disagreement. It communicates that another person is beneath consideration. It may appear as ridicule, humiliation, persistent mockery, dismissive treatment, deliberately embarrassing someone. Disagreement says, I think you're wrong. Contempt says, you're beneath me. Repeated contempt can damage relationships because it attacks dignity rather than ideas. Pattern 10, devaluation. Some relationships follow a disturbing cycle: idealization, attachment, devaluation. Someone may initially receive extraordinary praise. You're amazing. You're different from everyone else. You're the only person I can trust. Later, the same person may suddenly become worthless in the other's eyes. This dramatic shift can create confusion. The target may desperately try to recover the earlier approval. Not every change in someone's opinion represents manipulation. Relationships naturally evolve, but extreme cycles of excessive praise, followed by systematic degradation, deserve caution. Pattern 11, the need for control. Control can appear in subtle forms. Someone may attempt to determine who another person spends time with, what opinions are acceptable, how decisions are made, what information they can access, when they are allowed to disagree. Healthy cooperation involves negotiation. Control involves reducing another person's autonomy. A useful question is, can this person tolerate my independence? That answer may reveal more than their words. Pattern 12, the double standard. Double standards are particularly revealing. A person demands transparency but refuses to provide it. They expect loyalty but routinely betray others. They demand respect but ridicule people. They insist that mistakes should be forgiven when they make them, but treat others' mistakes as unforgivable. Everyone has occasional inconsistencies. Persistent double standards suggest something deeper. The strongest test is, would this person accept the same rule if it were applied to them? Pattern 13, image management. Some individuals invest heavily in controlling how others perceive them. They may carefully curate their reputation. They highlight achievements. They conceal failures. They surround themselves with prestigious associations. They may behave differently depending on who is watching. Image management itself is not necessarily dishonest. Professionals manage reputations. Organizations manage brands. Individuals naturally present themselves favorably. The warning sign is a persistent gap between public image and private behavior. Character is most visible when there is little incentive to perform. Pattern 14, the absence of remorse. Making a mistake and feeling bad about its consequences are different from merely regretting the consequences for oneself. Compare, I shouldn't have done that. I hurt you, with I shouldn't have done that. Now I'm in trouble. The second focuses primarily on personal consequences. Again, one statement cannot establish personality. Repeated patterns of indifference toward harm deserve closer attention. Pattern 15, divide and control. A person who benefits from conflict may create divisions between people. They may tell one person negative information about another. They may exaggerate disagreements. They may position themselves as the only trusted intermediary. Eventually, people become suspicious of one another, while becoming increasingly dependent on the intermediary. The best defense is direct communication. If someone tells you, "Don't tell them I said this," consider whether speaking directly with the person involved could clarify the situation. Independent communication reduces the power of triangulation. The danger of amateur diagnosis. There is an important boundary in psychological analysis. Do not diagnose people from social media posts, brief conversations, a single argument, appearance, body language, rumors, or personality quizzes. Terms such as psychopath, sociopath, and narcissist are frequently used casually online. Real psychological assessment is considerably more complicated. Someone can behave selfishly without having narcissistic personality disorder. Someone can lie without being a psychopath. Someone can manipulate in one situation without having a fixed manipulative personality. Behavior should be described before personality is inferred. Instead of, "He's a narcissist," say, "He repeatedly demands admiration and reacts aggressively to criticism." The second statement is observable and actionable. The pattern test. When evaluating troubling behavior, consider 5 dimensions. Frequency, how often does it happen? Consistency, does it happen across different situations? Severity, How harmful are the consequences? Accountability. Does the person acknowledge the problem? Change. Do they make genuine efforts to improve? These 5 dimensions provide a more useful picture than dramatic labels. A person who makes mistakes, accepts responsibility, and changes behavior is fundamentally different from someone who repeatedly causes harm, denies responsibility, and refuses to change. Character revealed by power. One of the most revealing questions is, how does someone behave when they have power over another person? When powerless, almost anyone can appear humble. Power changes incentives. A person who becomes cruel when given authority may reveal something important. A person who becomes more generous may reveal something equally important. Observe how people treat those who cannot advance their interests. Employees, service workers, subordinates, strangers, people who disagree with them. Character is often revealed when there is nothing obvious to gain. The dark personality mirror. The same patterns can appear inside ourselves. Ask, do I need constant admiration? Do I struggle to admit mistakes? Do I become angry when people establish boundaries? Do I use guilt to obtain compliance? Do I treat people differently according to their status? Do I demand standards from others that I don't apply to myself? Do I become controlling when I feel insecure? Do I care more about appearing good than actually doing good? These questions are uncomfortable. That is precisely why they are useful. Self-awareness is not self-condemnation. It is the ability to recognize patterns before they become character. How to respond to troubling patterns. You do not always need to understand someone's psychology completely before establishing boundaries. If someone's behavior repeatedly causes problems, focus on observable conduct. Say what you will accept. Say what you will not accept. Reduce unnecessary dependence. Keep important agreements clear. Seek independent perspectives when necessary. If a situation becomes threatening or unsafe, prioritize your safety and involve a trusted adult or appropriate authority. You do not need a psychological diagnosis to decide that certain behavior is unacceptable. The final lesson. Dark personality patterns are most useful to study when they teach us what to observe, not whom to condemn. Look for patterns. Look at behavior over time. Examine accountability. Watch how people respond to boundaries. Observe how they behave when they have power. Separate evidence from labels. And remember that personality exists on a spectrum of human characteristics. People are capable of growth, contradiction, and change. The most intelligent observer does not walk into every room thinking, "Who is the psychopath?" They ask something more practical. What patterns of behavior are present? How reliable is the evidence? And what boundaries are appropriate? That question keeps psychology grounded in reality, because the objective is not to become suspicious of everyone. It is to become sufficiently observant that charm does not blind you, labels do not control you, and repeated harmful behavior does not remain invisible simply because someone has learned how to present a convincing image. Study the pattern, verify the evidence, protect your boundaries, and never confuse a psychological label with understanding the human being. Chapter 12. Becoming difficult to manipulate. The most valuable lesson in dark psychology is not learning how to control other people. It is learning how to remain in control of your own judgment. Manipulation becomes powerful when another person can reliably trigger your fear, guilt, anger, insecurity, urgency, or desire for approval. If they can predict which emotional button will make you surrender your judgment, they possess leverage. The solution is not paranoia. It is psychological independence. A difficult-to-manipulate person is not someone who trusts nobody. It is someone who can trust carefully, think independently, tolerate discomfort, and make decisions without surrendering autonomy. Know your buttons. Everyone has psychological vulnerabilities. Some people are highly sensitive to criticism. Others desperately seek approval. Some hate disappointing people. Others fear rejection. Some become impulsive when offered an exciting opportunity. Others become irrational when they feel disrespected. Your vulnerabilities are not weaknesses in themselves. They become weaknesses when someone learns how to activate them deliberately. Ask yourself, what makes me react before I think? The answer identifies one of your psychological pressure points. The approval trap. One of the easiest ways to influence people is through approval. Praise feels good. Acceptance feels good. Recognition feels good. The danger begins when approval becomes more important than judgment. A person who desperately needs to be liked may agree to things they would normally reject. They may tolerate disrespect. They may avoid necessary confrontation They may make decisions based on how others will perceive them. The defense is simple. Learn to tolerate being misunderstood. Not everyone needs to approve of your decisions. A mature person can say, "You may disagree with me, and I can still respect you." The urgency trap. Manipulation often becomes easier when people are rushed. Under pressure, people have less time to investigate. They may overlook contradictions. They may accept unfavorable conditions. They may confuse urgency with importance. Whenever someone says, "Decide now," pause. Ask, why must this decision happen immediately? Sometimes there is a legitimate reason. Sometimes the urgency exists primarily to prevent careful consideration. The ability to delay a decision can be a form of psychological power. The emotional reset. When emotions become intense, do not immediately make irreversible decisions. Anger says, "Act now." Fear says, "Escape now." Excitement says, "Take the opportunity now." Shame says, "Fix this immediately." But emotions are signals, not commands. A useful mental habit is notice, pause, evaluate, decide. You do not have to suppress the emotion. You simply refuse to let the emotion automatically make the decision. Learn to say no. No is one of the most important words in psychological self-defense. You do not always need a long explanation. You can say, "No, I can't do that. I'm not comfortable with that. I need time to think. That doesn't work for me. I've decided not to proceed." People who are accustomed to controlling others may attempt to turn your refusal into a negotiation. You are not obligated to provide an endless defense. A boundary is not a debate. Beware of guilt. Guilt can be legitimate. If you hurt someone, guilt may encourage you to repair the damage. But guilt can also be manufactured. Statements such as, "If you cared about me, you would," or "After everything I've done for you," may attempt to connect compliance with moral worth. Separate the two questions. Did I do something wrong? And do I want to comply with this request? You can care about someone without giving them everything they ask for. Build an independent information network. Information independence is psychological independence. If one person controls all the information you receive, they can influence your understanding of reality. For important decisions, seek multiple perspectives, compare sources, check original evidence, ask people who have different incentives. Do not rely entirely on the person who benefits most from your decision to explain the situation. Independent information makes manipulation much harder. Question the frame. Remember the lesson from earlier chapters. The frame determines what you notice. Someone might ask, "Why are you afraid to invest?" The question assumes that fear is the reason. You can instead ask, "What evidence suggests this investment is appropriate?" Someone might say, "Everyone successful is doing this." Ask, "Is that actually true, and what evidence supports it?" Someone might say, "You either support me or you're against me." Ask, "Why are those the only two choices?" The ability to challenge the frame protects independent thinking. Watch for artificial scarcity. Only today, last opportunity, you may never get another chance. Sometimes scarcity is real, but artificial scarcity can create impulsive decisions. Whenever urgency and scarcity appear together, slow down. Ask, "What happens if I walk away?" If the answer is simply that you lose an opportunity, consider whether another opportunity may eventually appear. Walking away is sometimes the strongest negotiating position. Don't let charisma replace evidence. Charisma can be intoxicating. A confident speaker can make weak ideas sound impressive. A respected person can make questionable claims sound credible. A talented salesperson can make an ordinary product feel extraordinary. A charismatic leader can make followers overlook contradictions. The defense is to separate who is saying it from is it true. Ask for evidence. Ask for specifics. Ask what would prove the claim wrong. The more important independent evaluation becomes. Watch your need to win. Manipulators can exploit people's pride. If someone challenges you publicly, you may feel compelled to prove yourself. They now control your emotional state. The strongest response is sometimes to refuse the contest. You can say, "I don't need to settle this right now," or "Let's examine the evidence." Walking away from an unnecessary argument is not weakness. It is refusing to let someone else choose your emotional battlefield. Develop emotional self-control. Self-control is not emotional suppression. It is the ability to experience emotion without automatically obeying it. You can be angry without attacking. You can be afraid without panicking. You can be excited without becoming reckless. You can be disappointed without becoming desperate for approval. This creates a psychological buffer between stimulus and response. That buffer is where freedom lives. Learn your cognitive biases. Manipulation often succeeds because people possess predictable mental shortcuts. Some important ones include confirmation bias. We favor information that supports what we already believe. Authority bias. We may give excessive weight to people with status or expertise. Social proof. We may assume something is correct because many others appear to support it. Sunk cost effect. We may continue something simply because we have already invested heavily in it. Scarcity effect. We may value something more because it appears limited. Reciprocity. We may feel pressure to return favors. Knowing these tendencies does not eliminate them. It simply makes them easier to notice. Don't make decisions at your emotional peak. Major decisions deserve psychological distance. If you are extremely angry, wait. If you are euphoric, investigate. If you are frightened, verify. If you are desperate, seek independent advice. If you are exhausted, postpone important decisions where possible. The objective is not to become emotionless. It is to avoid allowing temporary emotional states to create permanent consequences. Protect your boundaries. Boundaries communicate what you will and will not accept. A boundary might involve how people speak to you, what information you share, how your time is used, what commitments you accept, what behavior you tolerate. A boundary without enforcement is often merely a preference. If someone repeatedly violates a clearly communicated boundary, the next step may be changing your participation rather than repeating the same warning indefinitely. Don't over-explain. Manipulative people can sometimes turn explanations into opportunities for negotiation. You say, "I can't come because I have several reasons." They respond to each reason. Soon you are defending your decision, instead of simply communicating it. Sometimes brevity protects clarity. "I can't do that" is complete. You do not need to construct a courtroom case for every personal decision. Maintain financial and social independence. Dependency increases vulnerability. Where practical, maintain independent relationships, independent sources of information, appropriate financial planning, personal skills, professional networks, trusted people you can consult. Independence does not mean isolation. It means you have alternatives. The more alternatives you possess, the harder it is for another person to make you believe you have no choice. Use the decision delay. For significant decisions, create a personal rule. Never make an important decision solely because someone else wants an immediate answer. Instead, write down the proposal. 3. Identify what you risk. 4. Identify what information is missing. 5. Consider alternatives. 6. Seek independent input when appropriate. 7. Decide after the emotional pressure has decreased. This simple process can prevent many impulsive decisions. Learn to detect pressure patterns. Watch for combinations such as urgency plus secrecy, fear plus guaranteed solution, guilt plus demand, flattery plus request, threat plus compliance, isolation plus dependency. No single combination proves malicious intent, but when several appear repeatedly, slow down. The objective is not to accuse, it is to investigate. Don't become impossible to influence. There is a danger on the opposite side. Someone who becomes obsessed with manipulation may begin distrusting everyone. Every compliment becomes suspicious. Every request becomes a trap. Every disagreement becomes psychological warfare. This is not freedom. It is another form of captivity. The goal is calibrated trust. Be open enough to learn. Be skeptical enough to verify. Be flexible enough to change your mind. Be independent enough to say no. The ultimate defense, self-knowledge. The person who understands their own psychology is harder to manipulate. Know what you fear. Know what you desire. Know what you cannot tolerate. Know where you seek approval. Know what makes you impulsive. Know what makes you defensive. Know which promises tempt you. Know which insults trigger you. Once you understand your own psychological architecture, other people have less power to surprise you. They may still influence you, but they have a harder time controlling you. The psychological firewall. Think of your mind as a system that requires protection. Your attention is the gateway. Your emotions are signals. Your beliefs are operating assumptions. Your judgment is the decision engine. Your boundaries are security controls. Your independent relationships are backup systems. Your critical thinking is the firewall. Manipulation becomes more difficult when these systems are functioning properly. The objective is not to eliminate every external influence. It is to prevent unauthorized control. The 5-question defense. When you feel intense pressure, ask: 1. What exactly am I being asked to do? Remove vague language. 2. Why do I feel I must decide now? Identify urgency. 3. What emotion is driving my reaction? Identify the pressure point. 4. What information am I missing? Identify uncertainty. 5. Would I make the same decision without this person's pressure? Test your autonomy. If you cannot answer these questions comfortably, pause. The final lesson. You cannot control what other people say. You cannot prevent people from attempting to influence you. You cannot eliminate persuasion from human relationships, but you can control your response. You can slow down. You can ask questions. You can verify information. You can tolerate disagreement. You can say no. You can change your mind. You can walk away. You can seek independent perspectives. And you can recognize when your own emotions are making you unusually vulnerable. That is psychological strength. Not becoming cold, not trusting nobody, not manipulating others before they manipulate you. Becoming difficult to manipulate means becoming difficult to separate from your own judgment. The strongest mind is not the one that never changes. It is the one that can change because of evidence rather than pressure. And when someone attempts to control your emotions, your choices, or your perception of reality, you possess one powerful response. Pause, think, verify, choose. That is the beginning of psychological freedom.